Chapter 1538. Be it Solidar Wrath of the Stars, or this golden bow, they were both made by High Elven craftsmen. High Elven golden bow was extremely beautiful. Because they came from the same source, it had the same style. The golden bow also had a large gauntlet that looked like an arm shield. The gauntlet had the totem of a fire phoenix on it. The bow that extended from the gauntlet was made into the shape of a golden dragon eagle. It had a red background with golden edges. The eagle's head was lifelike, and the beak was connected to the edge of the gauntlet. Further out from the eagle-shaped bow were two green curved scythe-like blades on top and bottom. Together with the golden bow's shape, the golden bow could be treated as a slightly weaker version of Ezenatha's warblade. What attracted Tyron the most was the history of this bow. This was the pinnacle of High Elven craftsmanship from 10,000 years ago. Although she did not want to admit it, after the destruction of Azhara, this level of craftsmanship was lost. Tyrant gently caressed the bow, a thoughtful expression on her face. Finally, she let out a long sigh. "I'll accept your kindness." The Gemini were not acting. They were truly relieved. Duque had forced them to betray him, but he had never promised them any benefits after they jumped ship. Either way, they would be dead meat if they did not jump ship. Perhaps there would be some hope if they did. The smart Gemini did not want to bet their lives on Duque's mercy, so they decisively started their public relations operation. Their first stop was obviously Tyrant. Now that Tyrant had accepted the gift, the most difficult part had been resolved. Tyrant sat on the sofa with her legs crossed. The White Moon Priest's robe made her look even more outstanding. The Gemini could not associate this noble woman in front of them with the female captive who had almost fallen into depravity in the War of the Ancients. If they were enemies, the Gemini would have done anything to cause trouble. But now, they were not even grandchildren. Tyrant glanced at the Gemini who were still kneeling on the floor and smiled. "Actually, I have to thank you. If not for you, I might have had no choice but to choose between my two childhood friends. That way, no matter which one I chose, the other would have been greatly hurt. Since things ended well back then, I have no intention of pursuing the matter. I just want to remind you." Gemini hurriedly bowed and kowtowed, her posture extremely humble. "What do you think? Please instruct me." Tyrant smiled as if she was organizing her thoughts. A few seconds later, she said slowly, "There was once a black dragon who was sinister and cunning. He wanted to infiltrate the Alliance and take control of the entire Alliance. She almost succeeded. However, in the end, she gave up all her plans and willingly became a mount. Do you know why?" Tyrant was naturally referring to the Black Dragon Princess, Onyxia. To be honest, Gemini was also a little curious about this matter. Tyrant's face was filled with fervent conviction, because she said that going against Duke Marcus is the same as going against the god of fate. Rather than being crushed and destroyed by fate, it's better to become the god of fate's subordinate. After saying this, Tyrant waved her hand, and Chandris immediately stood between her and Gemini. She was sending them off. The Gemini twins were shocked. They had too much shock that they had yet to digest. As a pair of cunning female demons, they had too many tricks up their sleeves. They never really wanted to rely on Duque. From start to finish, it was a choice made out of helplessness. In fact, they didn't even think that Duque would be able to kill Jaden. Duque had once again fought a beautiful battle, cleanly killing the most sinister and cunning demon in the Burning Legion. He didn't even give Jaden the slightest chance. Of course, part of this was because they had betrayed their boss. However, the important things like timing, whether to trust the information, and making decisions were all handled by Duque alone. More importantly, Duque's subordinates and his harem were all united. This gave the Gemini twins a huge headache. As long as the Burning Legion was not completely destroyed, they had to live under Duque's protection. Otherwise, they would have to gamble that the Legion would not be able to find them. Unfortunately, in the past 25,000 years, there were only two groups of demons that the Legion could not catch even if they wanted to. One was Valen's Drenii, and the other was Duque's Mark Dooku. The entire Legion knew how miserable Valen and his tribesmen were when they were being hunted down. Duque was the only one who made the Legion depressed for 10,000 years. This was because this guy ran away after acting cool. How exciting! This 10,000 years of reincarnation made the Gemini twins a little nervous. They had second thoughts. If Duque blamed them, wouldn't that mean the Gemini twins didn't dare to imagine it? At this time, they didn't dare to look for Duque either. They knew very well that they didn't have anything that Duque had to rely on. In fact, Duque didn't have the time either. He was ambushed in his own bedroom. Sneak attack. He directly used cut to replace the armor. In fact, Duque gave up on resisting when he saw the huge blue blade. As for the last move, the 5-star charm, it was an additional critical hit. Well, it was that simple to defeat a demigod. Duque, who was lying on his back, looked at Sylvanas with some embarrassment. Duque was very sure that he didn't have the paladin's anti-damage skill, so why did Queen Mao she look like her armor had been broken? Leather armor good rating. Short cloak and boots good rating. Holding the divine longbow, Solidar Wrath of the Stars, bad rating. Initiative plus 100% rating. At this moment, Queen Mao Shi's face had a fanatical excitement. Excuse me, have you become a berserker? Sylvanas raised her chin 45 degrees and gave Duque a provocative look. Come on. Weave demigod Duque, show me your divine sword. Let me tell you. Tonight I swear to slay a god. If you don't clean up after 3 days, you're going to tear the roof tiles off. Duque sneered. Just you. I'm not afraid even if you 3 sisters attack together. Not to mention you? You're courting death. Queen Mao Shi blushed. At most, I'll fight again and again. Since the dual flag had fallen from the sky, he couldn't blame anyone else for suffering the consequences. Duque's divine sword began to show its ferocious power. He died. Admit defeat, you're no match for me. This was, of course, a certain demigod's boasting. No, I'll never admit defeat. An hour passed. Hey, can you still do it? If you can't, don't call yourself a god slayer. You bastard, if you're so good, don't use your demigod body. Queen Mao continued to be stubborn. Fine, we'll talk about it later. It turned out that Queen Mao Shi's damage output depended on her roar. No. Chapter 1539. Apart from Aurelia and Sasha, Duque found a chance to clean up his harem. Of course, Duque used Master's Gift and Dragon Taming Skill on Vashj and Onyxia, who performed outstandingly in the Well of the Sun incident. When Duque carefully studied the female Naga's blood rush in her high elf form, as well as the exploration in the dragon's lair, Duque put on his coat and went to the study to take stock of the current situation of the Alliance. It was now the 25th year of the Dark Portal. Although the major events in history happened as expected, the current situation of the Alliance was very different from history. First of all, the 7 human kingdoms were either still alive, or like Stromgard, they had begun to rebuild their capital, the Riptide Fortress. Not only had their vitality been preserved, but it had also improved greatly compared to history. Secondly, it was the geographical advantage. After the battle at the Well of the Sun, it could basically be said that the entire Eastern Kingdom was united. Why did it say basically? Although the Amani trolls were cleared in the Lordaeron continent, the remaining trolls went south into the hinterlands and merged with the trolls there. They used the complicated terrain and tunnels to confront the Wildhammer dwarves in the Eagle's Nest Mountain. Tunnel warfare was a huge problem since ancient times. For the sake of survival, the trolls shamelessly played tunnel warfare. There was really no good solution. The only thing they could do was to let the Bronzebeard dwarves work together with the Wildhammer dwarves to slowly push forward. Duque had a better idea, but he needed time. Gilnis, the only one among the 7 human kingdoms who did not join the Alliance, was still playing with himself. After all, they were all humans. Duque could not force Xian Grameen to join the Alliance. That would not be in line with the purpose of the Alliance. Moreover, Gilnis would destroy himself sooner or later. When Xian became the Alpha Wolf, the Alliance could completely consolidate its rule in Lordaeron. After 10 years, the plague and corrosion in the northern Lordaeron were basically purified by the Cenarian Circle's druids. Food production and population were recovering. Overall, the Lordaeron continent did not have much of a problem. The situation in the southern continent was much more complicated. Although Duque had always hoped that the Bronzebeard dwarves could occupy more territory, it was actually too much. Magni and his brothers were very impressive. The Alliance's largest weapons center was at Steel Stove Castle, and so was the Technology Center. Almost all of the flying ships and cannons were in charge of Steel Stove Castle. Although the dwarves' fertility rate wasn't low, it was only relative to the elves. With the Bronzebeard dwarves' small population, after occupying Iron Furnace Castles Dan Morrower, Loch Moden in the east, the wetlands in the northeast, the barren lands in the southeast, and the original Scorching Canyon, Magni made a vow: "I don't want any more territory." The bronze-bearded dwarves had little need for territory. Their hobbies were more focused on forging and climbing the technology tree. They even returned the wetlands fortress of Grim Battle to their brother, the Wildhammer dwarves. Duque really didn't know if he should warn the Wildhammer dwarves. Sooner or later, someone would cause trouble in the Twilight Highlands to their east. The southern end of the southern continent was flooded due to the molten core. The Burning Steppes no longer lived up to its name. This was because a large river originated from the Black Rock Mountain and ran from west to east across the entire plain. It flowed from the foot of the Raging Flame Peak in the middle of the plain to the barren land. The Burning Steppes was previously covered in thick volcanic ash. Now that there was water, and the volcanic ash itself was rich in minerals. This made the Burning Steppes the most fertile land in the whole of Stormwind. William was overjoyed. Originally, William was still wondering if he should negotiate with Duque to take the Reedridge Mountains under the direct jurisdiction of the kingdom so that the royal family's territories could be linked together. Duque found it troublesome, so he gave William a brilliant idea: to dig a hole in the mountains in the north of the Elven Forest and open 2 large tunnels, one for carriages and the other for trains, directly to the southwest of the Burning Steppes. "The territory is yours and I'll pay for it." That's generous enough, right? William, of course, accepted this suggestion happily. According to the current level of engineering technology, it would only take 1 or 2 years for the tunnels to open. This was because during his tenure, William had defeated the great demons who worshipped Hakkar and occupied Gurub. Now, he had added the huge fertile land of the Burning Steppes to Stormwind. In Stormwind, many people had already started to call William the Holy King. In fact, since ancient times, the kings who could leave a good name in history were those who defended against foreign enemies and opened up new lands. William had achieved both of them, and his name in the annals of history was set in stone. The praise of the people also made William proud. It was said that he almost gave his son, the infamous dirty shepherd Anduin Rin, a brother. In the southern continent, most of the great demons had become specimens. Before the Battle of Ahn'Qiraj, Duque had purposely cleansed Stormwind and his own private army. Firstly, there was indeed a reason for the cleansing, and secondly, Duque was not interested in leaving behind future troubles. If these fellows suddenly turned over a new leaf and claimed to be converted to the Horde, with the current relationship between the Alliance and the Horde, Sal could ask for them from Duque, and Duque would be too embarrassed to refuse. Since the remnants of Gurub still believed in Hakkar, then sorry, please go on your way. However, there was a troll clan that Duque could not lay his hands on. That was the Zandalar trolls. These wise trolls from the era of the Dark Empire were not only wise, but could also play with magic. When the Alliance was clearing out the Gurub trolls, they had also put in a lot of effort and led the way. Furthermore, they occupied a palm-sized island in the sea west of Stranglethorn Vale, so the Alliance really had no reason to deal with them. They might as well establish a neutral race. They would not bully them, nor would they allow them to open up new territories in the Eastern Kingdom. With the destruction of Gurub, Stranglethorn Vale was divided equally between Stormwind and Kul Tiras. After the city of Booty Bay was built, they would be able to sleep peacefully. As for the Kalimdor continent, the support and suppression of the Horde was currently being planned. Finally, there was only one problem left. Arthas. Duque sat on the bench and let out a long sigh. If the gears of history did not change, then in at most 1 or 2 years, the Lich King would wake up from his long sleep, and Arthas' dark personality would take control of the body, preparing to launch an invasion. Naxxramas, who was supposed to be Arthas' vanguard, was already in the hands of the Alliance, so there was only one card left that was worth Duque's attention. With a thought from Duque's soul, the Eridar twins immediately came in eagerly. "Master! You were looking for us." He looked at the twins, who were wearing a translucent black veil-made uniform and had an exquisite figure. Duque smiled and pretended not to see them. "I have an important task for you." Chapter 1540. Enslaving a demon was like playing with fire. In the original history, the Doomsday Guards that the warlocks enslaved would have to be tested every once in a while. If the warlock's willpower was not strong enough, the Big Brother would break free and slap the warlock's face. It was not until later on, when the warlock's magic developed, that there was semi-permanent enslavement. The story told Duque that he should never believe that he could completely control a demon, and he should never judge a demon's values by the logic of an ordinary person. Although the Eridar Gemini looked like they were about to die, they would definitely sell him out as soon as they lost the pressure from Kill Jaden, or if they thought that they had a better way. Reality proved that even soul restraint was not that reliable. Since Duque could cut off a part of their souls, the enemy could do the same thing in the future and instigate the Gemini to betray him. The Eridar tribe had been with the Burning Legion for 25,000 years and had completely become a branch of the demons. Therefore, the Gemini could use them but not put them in an important position. However, the Black Sickle Council was made up entirely of warlocks. With the history of the Eridar Gemini enslaving the Eridar Gemini as a reference, Duque knew very well how to use the two female demons. Duque threw a document on the ground. Duque had never been one to overdo such arrogance, but it was a great deterrent to the Gemini. The seemingly gentle smile turned into a sneer in the Gemini's eyes. The Gemini thought to herself, "He must be complaining that we didn't directly participate in the battle against Kill Jaden," and drew a line with the Burning Legion. The Gemini, who was kneeling on the ground, moved her knees and crawled over to pick up the document. She secretly heaved a sigh of relief. They were still useful to Duque. "Saloras, the Doomsday Army's bones will soon spread the plague. You'll be in charge of the Lordaeron region. You'll be in charge of infiltrating the tribe's warlocks." The Gemini, who was initially a little anxious, immediately became flirtatious. Even her voice sounded flirtatious. "Do you have any special orders, Master?" Duque thought it was funny. Originally, during the final battle with the Burning Legion in history, the bosses of each profession had their own performances. Warlocks were the worst of them all, as a single demon lord had almost annihilated the Black Sickle Council. The others would have invited the Elemental Lords or the former Torbane King of Torrent Fort. However, the new Black Sickle Council was so poor that they could only send the Eridar Gemini to be the vanguard. Charging at the front was Gemini's final choice. If they could, they absolutely hated fighting. Therefore, Duque didn't need them to fight for him, which was very considerate of him. Dealing with the envoy of calamity who spread the plague was like fighting poison with poison. As a scheming female demon, of course, she knew how to infiltrate in the most secretive and effective way. Infiltration was the Gemini's favorite activity. Seeing that her own sister was playing infiltration while she could only play with bones, even Queen Salolas showed a little envious expression. Duque did not look at Salolas. He only stared at Alesis. Sal has begun to study the path of elements. In fact, this was in conflict with the Warlock path. I have no intention of dealing with Sal. However, in the future, Sal is destined to be unable to suppress the more traditional young faction in the tribe. Once Sal gives up his position due to some unforeseen event, such as an elemental riot, I will need a key chess piece. Ever since the Eridar Gemini decided to rely on Duque, they had done a lot of homework. They had to understand the current situation of the Alliance, such as the situation of the tribe. It was precisely because the Alliance was completely united that no force other than Duque could affect the overall situation. That was why they were so respectful of their new master. The tribe was different. At first glance, the tribe had gained more than 2 million orcs, allowing the orcs to become the absolute core race of the tribe in one fell swoop. This made the tribe even more powerful. It didn't feel bad, did it? In reality, the tribe was now really in a precarious situation. Sal had saved so many orcs from the old tribe from the dead land of Draenor. In a short period of time, every orc would be deeply grateful to Sal. However, after a long time, it would be a different story. The orcs of the traditional tribe were typical nomadic people. They would migrate to wherever there was prey. However, a complete and thriving food chain needed fertile land to support it. First, there had to be grass, then there were small and medium-sized herbivores, and then there were large carnivores. The current territory of the tribe was all on the Kalimdor continent of Azeroth. The Forgotten's Winter Spring, the Torrent's Thunder Cliff, the Troll's Echo Islands, and the Shining Plains, which was now controlled by the Rustwater conglomerate. Putting aside the territories of other tribes, the areas directly controlled by the orcs were now very barren. Duroder, the Barren Lands, the Thousand Needles, and half of Stonedalin Mountain. Among them, Stonedalin Mountain had a territorial dispute with the Night Elves. In the entire Kalimdor continent, there were not many areas for the tribe to expand. The northern Night Elves occupied Azhara, Grey Valley, Fellwood Forest, Black Sea Coast, and Mount Hyjal, completely cutting off the tribe's space to expand north. The two main cities of Exodar and Darnassus, which were in the northwest, were warning the tribe not to play with their navy here. In the east, Theramore was stuck in the middle of the tribe's territory like a nail, like a fish bone stuck in the throat, making the tribe very uncomfortable. In the south, Gadgetsan in the Great Tanaris Desert was a neutral trade zone. The goblins there and the Rustwater conglomerate were not on the same side. After the Kiraji insect empire turned to Duque, they regained their foothold and, together with the Cenarian Circle, mixed with the hot sand group of Gadgetsan, and jointly developed the Ungoro crater. Originally, the hot sand group was quite angry when they lost Booty Bay. The problem was that the alliance gave the hot sand group a chance, but they couldn't get it back by sending troops. After the alliance occupied Booty Bay, they didn't return it to the hot sand group. Kul Dylas was ready to make it the new capital. The goblins were not so good-tempered. Even Sal and Wajin were ready to watch the show at that time. Who knew that Duque and Jaina would be so shameless? They directly knocked out the hot sand group with a stick and gold. Booty Bay was fought by the trolls. If you don't have the ability to fight back, don't talk nonsense here. It's obvious that you can't handle it yourself, so the Alliance killed the trolls. The Alliance took the Deepwater port from the trolls with their strength. Why should the Alliance return it? If you make any more noise, we will take it as a declaration of war against the Alliance. All pro-Alliance forces, including the Bronze Dragon and the Kiraji Insect Empire, will launch an attack on Gadgetsan. Are you convinced? At this point, what else could the Hot Sand Group do? They couldn't beat the Alliance, so they could only surrender to the couple, Duque and Jaina. The stick shocked the goblins, so it was naturally a sweet date. The Alliance needs a lot of minerals, volcanic soil, rare earth. Let's develop the Ungoro crater together. Chapter 1541. Most goblins only recognized money. In the eyes of most goblins, the Horde was poor. How could they be as rich as the Alliance? What's more, the three richest families in the Alliance were the Kurtiras, Alterac, and Marcus families. The three families almost shared the same purse. Offending one was offending all three, and the Alliance's leader was still the demigod Duque. There was no need to say how the Hot Sand Group would choose. The defection of the Hot Sand Group directly made the Horde's southern expansion a bubble. After all, the Rustwater conglomerate could not go to war with its own compatriots for the Horde. The only way to expand was to the west, the desolate land and Feralus. The former was ownerless, while the latter was occupied by a group of neutral forces that were not under the Alliance's protection, such as the arena slave owners who had sold William as a slave gladiator. In the past, Sal would have handled the relationship with these neutral forces more carefully. Unfortunately, the food pressure brought by more than 2 million orcs was so great that Sal could not breathe. The Horde could not rely on the Alliance's food support, and the Alliance's food was mainly cereals, which was not suitable for the traditional orc's appetite. Duque was generous and did not mind exporting pig-raising technology to the Horde. Unfortunately, breeding was also an industry with a knack. If you wanted to raise pigs, you had to at least have pig feed, right? After half a circle, it was actually back to the old problem. The land was too barren, and there was no industrial base and scientific knowledge. The alliance would give the horde a limited blood transfusion, but would never teach the horde to produce blood. Sal was determined and directly launched a war involving hundreds of thousands of orcs. The first war started in Duroder, and the horde directly used human wave tactics to destroy the centaur tribe entrenched in the south of Duroder. Then 2 fronts, one south and one north, swept through the desolate land and Feralas at the same time. It was worth mentioning that a newcomer rose in the horde. He was Gurus Hellscream, the son of Lord Howl, Grom. Gurus was born in Draenor's orc home garden, Nagrand. His growth was not contaminated by the demonic blood flowing in the invading Azeroth orcs. Although he was not affected by the corruption, Gurus had always lived under the shadow of his past. His father, Grom, was the first orc to be corrupted by drinking the blood of Manaroth, the Lord of the Abyss. Gurus had been ashamed of his father's actions until he met Thrall, the great chief. The founder of the revived tribe told the young Gurus about how his father had fought bravely against the Lord of the Abyss, Manaroth, in the Battle of Mount Hyjal, and how his father had swept through the molten core and killed the traitor Blackhand brothers in Blackwing's Nest. Finally, after the Battle of Karaj, he could no longer fight and had to retreat to the second line. Unlike the original history, the original Master Ho's merits and demerits were equal, and he was worthy of respect. However, in this life, Master Ho's merits outweighed his faults. As the founder of the new tribe, Master Howl used the extra time he had to live to add even more heroism to his heroic legend. If there was anything Garush disliked about his father, it was that he had sworn to serve a human demigod after his death. Generally speaking, Garush worshipped his father. Garush then followed Thrall to Azeroth as an advisor. Soon, he was appointed as the leader of the Warsong clan's vanguard to wipe out the centaurs. The courage, tenacity, and warlike he showed on the battlefield left a deep impression on the other members of the tribe. At the same time, they were worried about Garush's indifference to the opinions of the members of the tribe who were not orcs. Not to mention, he deeply hated the Alliance. Even if the Alliance provided the tribe with transportation to evacuate Draenor. This was obviously contrary to the current mainstream multiracial integration of the tribe, as well as the friendly policy with the Alliance. Thrall saw this, but he had no reason to punish such a young and vigorous orc. In fact, most of the orcs from Draenor had such a temper. Thrall was now in a difficult situation. However, he still had to deal with Gerald. The demigod Gruul was not a good-tempered master. The only fortunate thing was that he chose to focus on the desolate land instead of the lush Feralas region, which the tribe was more optimistic about. When Duque briefly explained the situation of the tribe to the Gemini's mind filled in a lot of things. Does Master want Auras to destroy the entire tribe by controlling the warlocks of the tribe? Not to mention Auras, even Solola's was eager to try. The Gemini was the best at this kind of thing. Duque raised his index finger and shook it. This is too low-end. The words low-end made the Gemini's face turn red. Didn't this mean that their methods were not good? Duque pondered for a moment, then said directly, fate seems to be impermanent and irregular. In fact, the general trend of fate was decided the moment the leader made a choice. The Alliance will not take the initiative to destroy the tribe. Doing so will only make the Burning Legion happy. The power of Azeroth should not be weakened, because in 10 years at most, a full-scale war will start. But the division and conflict of the tribe was destined from the moment Thrall took in 2 million orcs to Azeroth. This rift will only get bigger and bigger. In fact, the Alliance does not need to do anything special at all. They only need to know the necessary information to be able to act at the best time and reap the greatest benefits. It's like ambushing kill Jaden. When Duque said this, the Gemini's heart trembled at the same time. This time, they finally understood that the difference between them and Duque was not in strength, nor was it in controlling souls, but in the realm of thinking. Just like this time, Jaden put in a lot of effort and did not hesitate to let Illidan go. Even when the Alliance besieged the Outland, he remained silent so that he could secretly set up a portal to the Well of the Sun to sneak in. After plotting so many schemes and spending so much time, in the end, wasn't it all because of Duke's crucial point, directly causing him to fly into the sky? This kind of taking advantage of the enemy's plots and conflicts to achieve the greatest results with the least amount of effort was the highest level of planning. Jaden was a chess player with the universe as his chessboard, then Duque should be the chess king, right? Suddenly, for the first time in their lives, the Gemini felt a sense of fear towards Duque. Could it be that Duque was really the god of fate that Tyron spoke of? The Gemini retreated. Soon, Duque summoned a second group of people. It was the Shorty Kings group. The three Bronzebeard brothers, Kudrin Wildhammer, and the great craftsman Gerben. Duque said immediately, "The alliance is now like a war machine. Once the machine stops, it will be difficult to restart it. So the machine can turn slowly, but it cannot stop. I have a plan now, that is the Fearless Fortress." Chapter 1542. Fearless Fortress. Just the name alone was enough to make one's blood boil. All of a sudden, the breathing of the dwarf kings quickened, especially Muradin. He had been betrayed by Arthas, whom he had once regarded as his best friend. This was a humiliation that would never fade from his face. Arthas was not completely depraved when he pulled out Frostmourne. It was one thing not to finish Muradin off. Betraying Muradin was another. Not only Duke, but even Magni noticed that his second brother's fists were clenched so tightly that cracking sounds could be heard. "Brother!" His eldest brother's call made Muradin return to normal. "Sorry, I forgot myself." Seeing Muradin's quick reply, the other two brothers smiled. Magni patted Muradin's shoulder. "This is the Bronzebeard family's rock. Rock solid." This was a compliment for dwarves. Then, Magni nodded at Duque. Duque announced, "As for the construction and defense of the Fearless Fortress, I'll leave it to Kudrin, Muradin, and Gerben. Kudrin will be the commander of the Fearless Fortress." It was a very reasonable arrangement. Kudrin was the real king, so he was naturally the leader. Gerben was in charge of technology, and Muradin was in charge of the army. It was a very reasonable arrangement. Duque turned to Bulang. "Bring Naxxramas to cover the construction of the Fearless Fortress. Of course, you won't be the only one to cover the troops." With a thought from Duque, the door to the study opened again. Two energetic elves walked in. The elemental waves on their bodies were so strong that they could be seen with the naked eye, and attracted the attention of others. It was naturally Vashj and Kale, the two who had a difficult life in history, falling into the path of evil, and finally being destroyed at this point in time, had now become the backbone of the alliance. Duque was truly amazed at the wonders of fate. Duque smiled. "Kale, I was busy dealing with Jaden, so I haven't told you about the crusade against Arthas. But I think you'll be happy to come." The handsome former prince had become more mature after going through so much. His jade-like face had a determination that had never been seen before. "Of course I'm willing. For our dead comrades. For that unforgettable history. For the future of Azeroth. I will not shirk my duty." "Good. Bulang's face lit up. With a Breaking Dawn mage who was the closest to becoming a demigod overseeing things, it was much safer. Duke looked at Vashj again. He did not say anything and just nodded. It was precisely because they were familiar with each other that there was no need for words. This sense of intimacy and trust made Vashj even more excited with a mixture of sweetness and fanaticism. In her elven form, Vashj twirled the corners of her skirt with both hands and performed a maidservant's bow. At this point, the early preparations for the expedition to Noscent were already perfect. Duque concluded, Lich King Nazul's will was not strong. After the fusion, it should be dominated by the will of the former Arthas. I have to say, Arthas is quite a talented fellow. Arthas will be very patient. But patience didn't mean waiting for death. Thus, my request is to complete the preparations for the Allied army's attack on Northrend without provoking Arthas to wake up early. The Alliance needs a large batch of griffins and hippogriffs that can adapt to extreme cold weather. We need a feasible plan to quickly build a railway. We also need a forward operating base that can accommodate 500,000 troops. Everyone, let me emphasize again. This is a war between the living and the dead. There is no way out of this. Please be extremely cautious. Most of the people present had experienced the third battle of the Dark Portal or were strong people who had already proven themselves on the battlefield. There was not even a single newbie. In addition, they had more or less worked together before, so there was no problem at all. After Duque decided on the candidates, they automatically entered the state and began to discuss countermeasures. Duque was very satisfied with this situation. The Alliance indeed had him as the core, but it was not an incompetent organization that had to ask him for instructions for everything. After 25 years of campaigning, the leaders of the Alliance, other than the hooligans, were all amazing people who could take charge of an area. Moreover, Duque had more important things to do. After Kudrin and the others left, Duque entered a state of meditation on the highest floor of the Karazhan Mage Tower. System ELF. Establish an analysis model. Divide the entire process of my battle with Kill Jaden into different modules, with elemental fluctuations, magic circuit operation, external energy exchange, energy compression and expansion as the standard. I need to fully analyze the magic of the Eridar family and strengthen their control over the elements. The initial standard is True God level. In addition, I also need to establish a spatial model. I need to fully scan the entire planet Azeroth. I don't want the space barrier to be broken at will again. That's right, Duque found that the space barrier of Azeroth was getting more and more troublesome. Before Medivh was possessed by Sardras and opened the Dark Portal, the intelligent creatures of Azeroth had a comfortable life. Ever since Old Mai was possessed and started to cause trouble, the space barrier of Azeroth had been getting worse day by day. There were internal and external reasons, so it was understandable that everyone hated Medivh. Of course, Duque didn't have the time to care about these old scores. The problem in front of him now was that the Blue Dragon King Malygos seemed to want to cause trouble. As the first person in Azeroth to be granted a magic position by the Titans, Malygos had always regarded himself as the ultimate ruler of magic. During the ancient war 10,000 years ago, he was extremely dissatisfied with the High Elves' abuse of magic, which led to the Burning Legion. The first Well of Eternity exploded, splitting the continent of ancient Kalimdor into 4 large pieces, causing devastating damage to the planet's environment. The Well of Eternity on Mount Hyjal also exploded, blowing up the entire mountaintop and causing irreversible damage to the surrounding ecology. Now, even the Well of the Sun was being spied on, and Cultivation was almost let in. It was hard to say whether Malygos would act on a whim, as he had done in history. After all, in the original history his wife had died, and his children were gone. His once lively family had now become desolate, and the ones who did this were his brothers who had been through life and death with him. This was a huge blow, and it directly caused Malygos to become crazy. His mind was extremely unstable, and he didn't care about the Guardian of Magic at all. Just like that, he went crazy for almost 10,000 years, until he absorbed part of the Nether Dragon's essence by chance, and unexpectedly regained his sanity. But who knew that Malygos might have been crazy for too long, and he actually figured out a set of logic to convince himself. This set of logic was, mortals use magic to cause disasters, and disasters will destroy Azeroth. I'm the guardian dragon of Azeroth, so I want to ban mortals from using magic and destroy all magic creations. Chapter 1543. However, would Malygos still do the same in this life? Duke couldn't help but put a huge question mark on his head. After all, I've already avenged you, Elder Malygos. Nethario, the Wing of Death, was already 3 feet tall. And more than 20 years ago, no one really knew what kind of indescribable cruelty you did when you returned with Nethario's dragon head. You've avenged yourself, so theoretically, you shouldn't be so resentful anymore, right? Duque really couldn't make up his mind, so he could only ask Alexstrasza for help. When the human form of the Red Dragon appeared in the magic communication mirror, Duque directly asked his question, right? Does Malygos have any opinions about the Sunwell incident? The queen put her hands on her hips and said helplessly, he's been throwing a tantrum recently. He said that the Well of Eternity and the Sunwell are scourges, and that we, the dragon aspect, can't guard against thieves no matter how hard we try. When Duque heard this, his heart skipped a beat, and he cursed inwardly. It was hard to guard against thieves day and night. If Malygos insisted on treating the Well of Eternity and the Sunwell as thieves, then it wouldn't be a good thing. The Well of Eternity had been blown up twice, and there was nothing left. Although the Blood Elves wouldn't use the Sunwell specifically now, what if Malygos interfered and said that the Blue Dragons would take care of it? Should he give it or not? If he gave it, where would Sylvanas put her face as a queen? If he didn't, what if Malygos got angry and ordered the Blue Dragon Legion to attack Silvermoon City? Silvermoon City's defense was not bad, but that was only at the level of mortals. Even though the elites of the Blue Dragons were wiped out because of Netherio's betrayal in the Ancient War, they could still pull out 8 or 10 adult dragons. If the young dragons and fledglings were included, there would be even more. Once the war with the Blue Dragon Legion started, the alliance was bound to stand on the side of the elves. At that time, how would the Dragon Sleep Temple be dealt with? In any case, the best choice was to eliminate the conflict before it started. Otherwise, when it came to the point of life and death, no matter which choice was made, it would still be Azeroth that would suffer in the end. Every time a dragon aspect died, the planet's protection array would weaken. Even if he found a successor, the new would not be as good as the old. For example, Onyxia was just there to make up the numbers. Having her was better than nothing. Dragons had their own way of thinking, and it was difficult for Duque to figure out what Malygos was thinking. In the end, he could only let out a long sigh and express his worry. Alexstrasza, you and I have known each other for so long, and you know that. I've always prioritized the safety of Azeroth. I have never wished to judge my own people with the greatest malice. But I've never been able to talk to Malygos, and I'm really worried that he'll go too far this time. You mean, if? I said if. Duque emphasized, if Malygos insists that the Sunwell is a scourge, I can agree to seal it on behalf of Queen Sylvanas. However, he definitely couldn't hand over the task of guarding this place to the Blue Dragon tribe, at least not on the surface. Do you understand what I mean? When Duque said this, Alexstrasza's eyes lit up, and her bright pupils shone with a dazzling light. As expected, I knew you had a better idea. Only now was the Red Dragon Queen willing to tell the truth. Actually, since the day they defeated Jaden, Malygos had been throwing a tantrum in the Dragon Slumber Temple and smashing several side halls. He was really shouting that mortals were not qualified to use such terrifying magic. Duque secretly compared it and found that Malygos was slightly milder than in the original history. At least he didn't claim that mortals were not even qualified to use magic. However, Malygos proposed to put all magic users under supervision. For example, all humans and elves should be connected to Duque's magic net, and all mages should be regulated. All spellcasters who did not connect to the magic net should be killed upon discovery to prevent future trouble. Now, this was because Duque had helped him take revenge, and because Duque was now a true demigod of Azeroth. Even so, Malygos' words were still unacceptable to Duque. How could the world be so simple? This kind of black and white approach would only force all neutral parties to stand against one's own. Moreover, all models and regulations would only stifle the invention of all new magic. This was what Duque valued the most and could not accept. Duque pondered for a long time. Alexstrasza, can you help me make an appointment with Malygos? There are some things I want to make clear to him in person. The Red Dragon Queen shook her head regretfully. Sorry, that guy is stubborn and loves face. He used to look down on you. No, it should be said that he looked down on all existences other than the dragon aspect and Elune. Now that you are on equal footing with him, he can't accept it. In fact, even if you use magic to send him a message, he will refuse to answer. Duque was embarrassed. Malygos, why did you give up treatment? After complaining in his heart, Duque could only sigh. Well, then I suggest that we let Calegos and Matagosa guard the Sunwell. As for the rest, when he calms down, you can slowly persuade him. Okay, thank you for your understanding. The Red Dragon Queen showed an apologetic expression. After ending the magic transmission, Duque's eyes and expression became cold. Malygos, don't be untactful. Since you are fated to die in history, if I try my best and you still insist on courting death, then don't blame me. Even if I pretend to be a good person, there is a limit. This time, Duque waited for 3 days, relying on the system elf to review the official documents while waiting for news from Maligos. It seemed that history had taken an unknown turn because Duque killed Nisario ahead of time. The news from the Temple of Sleeping Dragon was that the Blue Dragon King had finally decided to send Calegos and Matagosa to supervise the restoration of the space around the Sunwell. Duque and Queen Sylvanas met the 2 blue dragons on the dilapidated Isle of Quel, Danas. Calegos looked the same as before. He still had blue hair that Duque found very irritating, but at least Calegos had used the ultimate transformation spell to give himself a pair of long pointed ears and the exaggerated long eyebrows unique to elves. And his attire was no different from that of a standard noble mage of the Silver Moon Council. If it weren't for the fact that most elves lived long and basically knew all the former members of the Silver Moon Council, he might really have gotten away with it. As for Matagosa, she really had the appearance of a human woman. However, the robe she wore and the badge she wore belonged to the Marcus family. In theory, she was here on behalf of the Marcus family to monitor the Sunwell. This was quite interesting. Chapter 1544. Duque could only say that Matagosa's imagination was not small, and it was quite on point. To push Calegos back, one had to become a human woman. There were not many human kingdoms or forces that the elves would not dislike, and the Marcus family was the best choice. Now, the entire upper class of Sindorii knew that the 3 queens and sisters were Duque's property. Without Duque's support, Sindorii's livelihood would definitely be much worse than it was now. The Blood Elves had rather complicated feelings about Duque. On the one hand, they were grateful for Duque's strong support. On the other hand, they lamented that their most beautiful cabbage had been taken by a wild boar, and a demigod level one at that. Of course, the overall impression was still pretty good. With the endorsement of Duque and Queen Sylvanas, the elves quickly accepted Carrie, who had returned from learning magic from the Dalajan, and Matty, the inspector of the Marcus family, as the new guard captains of the Well of the Sun. Avoiding direct conflict with the Blue Dragon Legion, Duque secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Before this, Duque had secretly pulled almost 80% of the Alliance's air force into the Long Song Forest. Now that there was no need to fight, Duque was in a good mood. He glanced at Matagosa and then at Calegos. Only the Blue Dragon sister could understand his actions. Matagosa did not avoid it and directly made a V gesture with his finger in a blind spot that Calegos could not see. This was definitely not the meaning of victory. This gesture was similar to the Guan Yu that was often worshipped at the entrance of restaurants. A knife in one hand and 2 fingers in the other. The meaning was simple and straightforward, cheating neither old nor young. I'll cut you down 2 tails for a pound. Matagosa was telling Duque that he had successfully pushed Calegos twice. Alas, the love of dragons was so simple and straightforward. Alright, you win, coquettish dragon. Without the Blue Dragon Legion to stir up trouble, Duque could put his energy back into the Alliance. The Alliance's wartime economic model could not be immediately revoked. It was like a taut string. Once it was too loose, it could easily snap if it was tightened again. Duque only ordered the military industry to work in 3 shifts 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, with 2 shifts of 16 hours a day. There was no other way. Historically, when the Allied armies attacked Northrend, they relied on men and horses. The number of soldiers and civilians who froze to death and frostbite was astronomical. Letting the soldiers who were cold, tired, and lacking supplies fight against the tireless dead was no different from sending themselves to their deaths. Duque wanted to reduce the Alliance's losses, and having Kudrin build a forward operating base was only the first step. More importantly, the Alliance army changed. With the precedent of the millions of German troops attacking the Soviet Union in World War II on Earth, Duque, who knew the bitter cold of no scent, had made a lot of preparations. There were 1 million sets of military coats for humans, dwarves, gnomes, elves, Draenei, and even 30,000 sets for orcs. Then there were matches for the fire as well as whale oil gels and industrial gels that had been cut into small pieces beforehand. Whale oil was easy to process, but the production was too low. Industrial gels were one of the byproducts of refining petroleum. Although it was a bit smelly, it was the best fuel in no scent. Since it could be burned, it was the best for the soldiers to cook on a picnic. Imagine marching for a whole day in a world of ice and snow dozens of degrees below zero. If they could only eat cold compressed biscuits and drink snow water that would freeze their stomachs, what a nightmare it would be. If there were fragrant hot soup and food, it would be extremely beneficial to physical recovery and morale boost. In addition, the writing of the winter code, the weaving of winter clothing, sleigh training, and all kinds of trivial things might seem unremarkable, but those who knew would know at a glance that it was because of the various preparations made before the war that the soldiers could play their due combat power on the front lines. The Alliance is really lucky to have a commander who doesn't treat soldiers as mere consumables. Every officer praised Duque in unison. Thinking about how Duque could be a god who didn't care about anyone, everyone's respect and love for Duque deepened. It was lucky to have a wise leader, such as the Horde. At least under Sal's leadership, more than 2 million orcs escaped from Draenor. However, a little bit of luck was not enough to bring a horde with millions of people on the road to happiness. After not having to face the outland that was gradually collapsing, food and other problems became increasingly prominent. What was even more unfortunate was that because the Dragon Sleep Temple had previously concentrated most of the energy of the planet's protection array to bombard Jaden, many demons had been released. In fact, the number and quality of demons that had parachuted into the Eastern Kingdom and Kalimdor were about the same. However, the Alliance not only had a perfect magic communication system, as well as a patrol system in each village and town, but also a magic net that covered a large area. It was no exaggeration to say that if there was any movement in the Alliance, Duque, as the highest commander, would be the first to know. Orders were relayed from top to bottom, and elite troops were sent to eliminate the scattered demons in the bud. The Horde was different. The addition of 2 million people made places like the Barren Lands more populated. Unfortunately, orcs were not creatures that didn't eat or drink. They instinctively gathered in the few oases in the Barren Lands. Because of their living habits and the lack of planning by the upper echelons of the Horde, this led to the rapid consumption of water resources. At the same time, the concentration of population encouraged the spread of demons. Several times when the Horde discovered the problem, thousands of people had died, and several villages had been completely destroyed. The entire land of Kalimdor could be said to be full of beacons. So, having a transmigrator as a leader was not only luck, but also bliss. Unknowingly, the gap between the Horde and the Alliance did not shrink because of the influx of a large number of people. Instead, it became wider. After all, the Horde had problems digesting the population, and the conflict between the new Horde led by Sal and the traditional orcs from Draenor began to expand. Just as one side was recuperating and the other side was in turmoil, it was autumn of the 25th year of the Dark Portal. On October 3rd, Sal suddenly received bad news. What? We lost contact with the entire Blackbone clan? There are even traces of corpses crawling out of the graveyard. The Blackbone clan was just an inconspicuous small clan among the thousands of orc clans of various sizes. But the death of an entire clan, and the possibility that they had become undead soldiers, touched Sal's sensitive nerves during this period. It wasn't that the Alliance didn't remind the Horde that the Scourge army could come again at any time. But Sal was almost broken by all kinds of internal affairs. After all, before the Scourge army came again, half of the Horde had to starve to death. Throughout the spring and summer, the Horde was struggling for survival. Chapter 1545. It was obvious that the tribe would have to pay for their carelessness. The current situation was like an endless loop. The tribe lacked food, and hunting alone was unable to meet the needs of the rapidly increasing orc population. The Alliance was not a charity. If you wanted food from the Alliance, you had to exchange it with ores. Traditional Draenor orcs also hated the act of engaging in productive work. Not only did they refuse to be miners, but the clans also refused to hand over their own hard work to the tribe. Since there was nothing to eat, the clans followed the tradition of robbing other clans. If the clans next to them did not have food, they would go to places with food like locusts. In the area controlled by the tribe in Kalimdor, the most fertile land was the grassy Thunder Cliff. Many starving orc clans ignored Thrall's ban and reached out to the Tauren Kodo herd. In their eyes, this kind of huge beast was worthy of the tribe's warriors. Cairn Bloodhoof ran to Thrall to complain every 2 or 3 days. Thrall repeatedly forbade the orcs from attacking the Tauren territory, but the poaching situation was still very serious. Not only poaching, but there were also private fights every day. Draenor orcs, ogres, and even Gruul's subordinates, Gallen, all came to Thundercliff to eat. This drove Cairn crazy, and he almost announced that the Tauren would withdraw from the tribe. In the end, Thrall had to let Varrock Salyafar patrol the border of Thundercliff with the chief's personal guards. Those who were caught poaching were publicly executed, and the situation was barely suppressed. Unfortunately, Thundercliff was the shortest and most convenient passage to the desolate land. As long as the Tauren stayed in the tribe, there was no reason to refuse the orcs to pass through their territory. It made the Tauren watch every orc passing through the road like a thief. This further exacerbated the conflict within the tribe. Now, seeing the report that the Scourge army was likely to sweep through Azeroth again, Thrall, who was inspecting the crossroads of the Barren Lands, felt deeply frustrated after reading the report. Was I wrong? I spent half a year, but I still couldn't let my people live a stable life. His eyes, which were always incomparably firm, began to have a confused look. Wajin did not know how to persuade Thrall, so he could only pat Thrall on the shoulder. No, Chief, you have done very well. No one in the tribe will do better than you. Actually, Sar was also bewitched. Even in Duque's celestial empire, it was not a simple thing to change from a nomadic people to a farming people, and it was not something that could be done in a short period of time. Throughout history, the Han had assimilated many nomadic tribes, but it often required the efforts of several generations to constantly change their customs and provide better living conditions and job opportunities before the transformation could be completed. Originally, the best way to divert internal conflicts was war. Unfortunately, the Alliance would not give the Horde such a chance. The absolute difference in power was not only known to the orcs that Thrall had brought from the Eastern Kingdom. Even the orcs who migrated from Draenor knew about it. While the Alliance was transporting the orcs, under Duque's secret guidance, they did not hesitate to show off the Alliance's muscles, the disciplined soldiers, the earth-shattering cannons, the rumbling tanks, and the gigantic battleships. Even if the targets were scattered demons or crazy evil beastmen, it was enough to leave a deep impression on anyone who saw it. To be honest, Sal felt like it was a miracle. Almost every night when he lay down, he wondered if the Alliance would turn around and destroy the Horde without the oppression of foreign enemies. However, at this time, Sal could not think too much about it. He would never forget how he led the newly freed Horde to fight the Scourge Legion in the southern Dalagen 10 years ago. Even if the Horde now had a branch of the Forsaken who did not go too far could not be compared to the Scourge Legion who spread death wantonly. Alas! Sal sighed deeply. Wajin, pass the order to gather the warriors of the Frostwolf clan and select warriors suitable for the cold weather from the tribe. We have no choice but to accept Duke's proposal for an expedition to Northrend. Who is going to lead the army? Wajin was not actually asking, but reminding Sal. Now that the atmosphere in the Horde was so stiff, most of the other races were unwilling to go on an expedition. No one wanted to go out here and have their homes raided by their own people. Especially the Tauren. The Alliance had put forward a requirement for cooperative warfare, and most of them were infantry. If the Tauren did not go, then only the orcs could fight in close combat. Sal's eyes were filled with sorrow. Just as he was a little hesitant, a young and majestic figure came into his sight. It was a burly young orc. Unlike the traditional Draenor orcs, he was more disciplined, and he also believed in the ideals of honor and firmness that his father believed in. And his character determined that he would be a brave warrior until the last moment. What do you think about letting Draenor go? Dranos Seraphar was Dranos Seraphar, also known as Little Seraphar. He was the young son of Varrock Seraphar and the nephew of the Horde's great hero, Brock Seraphar. Whether it was bloodline, status, or battle record, he was the leader of the younger generation. However, will the Alliance think that we are not good enough? Wajin cautiously reminded Sal. Sal smiled bitterly. Can I leave in this situation? Could Varrock walk away? Or are you going? The leaders of the horde could not leave. Now the horde was like a barrel of gunpowder, exploding at the slightest touch. If Sal was not here, the horde would self-destruct without the Lich King's attack. Wajin, as the first advisor under Sal, was not only the leader of the trolls, but also the mediator. Many things that the chief could not come forward, he would come forward. Cain was nervous, so of course he would not go out. A Nastrian would not appear in front of the alliance if he had a guilty conscience. As for Galavix of the Rustwater conglomerate, the ruthless and cunning prince of trade, would he be willing to go to the battlefield for the horde? There was no other way, they could only pick the tall ones. Sal comforted himself and said to Wajin, the alliance has many talented people, and the horde must also cultivate their own talents. Otherwise, we will fall behind. Sometimes, we can only let go and let the younger generation go. In fact, Sal was also very young. He was now 25 years old. Unfortunately, Sal had started his career early. 10 years ago, he had already become the founder of a new tribe and had become more senior. Woken could not refute what he said, and cautiously said, Duke Marcus' personal integrity is still very good. At least he has never broken his promise, nor has he deliberately harmed the horde. I can only hope that everything goes well. Sal sighed. Chapter 1546. On the alliance's side, Duque, who was in his own study in Karazhan, felt his balls ache when he heard that Thrall was really going to send Salyafar over. Damn, was he really going to repeat the Gate of Heaven's Wrath? The answer was obvious. Only a moron would do such a thing. In history, it was the Stormwind City Regent, Duke Bolvar for Dragon, and Salyafar who led the Alliance and Horde armies to fight side by side against the Gate of Heaven's Wrath. Then, Lich King Arthas, who was supposed to be in charge of the Ice Crown Fortress, appeared. How could Salyafar, who had the word brave carved on his chest, be afraid when he suddenly saw the enemy boss? He just went for it. He wanted to hack Arthas to death with his axe. In the end, not only did the Japanese not succeed, but they were also taken advantage of. Second Fool used Frostmourne to cleanly cut down Salyafar Jr. just as the war was about to break out. The Allied forces fell into the Dreadlord Verimithas's trap. Master Potioneer Putray of the Royal Pharmacist Association of Undercity betrayed them. This old fox used a new plague to kill all the undead, Alliance, and Horde soldiers at the Gate of Heaven's Wrath. Duke Bolvar was on his last breath, and Lich King Arthas retreated with heavy injuries. The Red Dragon Queen, who rushed over after hearing the news, found that the poison was spreading quite seriously. If it wasn't suppressed, all of Northrend would become a world of death. After all, the Dragon Slumber Temple was also in Northrend. Alexstrasza directly ordered the Red Dragon Legion to set fire to the battlefield with a powerful and blazing dragon breath to suppress the spread of the plague. In the original battle at the Gate of Heaven's Wrath, it could be said that the Calamity, the Alliance, the Horde, and even Sylvanas were the losers. It was like 4 people playing mahjong, and everyone had lost. In the end, the mahjong table was winning money. The situation in this life was very different from history. Duque couldn't afford to lose any of the Alliance's higher-ups just for a little Salyafar who only knew how to be reckless. Moreover, there were so many veterans of the Alliance who had changed their fates and survived. When would it be Bolvar's turn to fight? So far, Bolvar didn't have any notable achievements. He was just someone who looked after Varian's house. Duque couldn't bear to send young Salyafar off with William and his team. But won't a Nastrian cause trouble? Duque seemed to be muttering to himself. But there were 2 other beings in the room. Without a doubt. Definitely. The 2 voices spoke almost at the same time, and then they looked at each other. Queen Salolas took the initiative to lower her head and avoid eye contact, while Vashch, who was dressed in a white lace-made uniform, raised her chin slightly, seemingly a little proud. Duque rested his chin on his hand. He knew that Vashch was faking it. She used to be a palace maid. First, she fought secretly with other maids in the palace for 1,000 years. Then, she fought openly and covertly in the dark underwater world for 10,000 years. Her skill in palace fights was no less than that of the Eridar twins. If Duque hadn't secretly held back before Vashj became a Naga and inadvertently made himself her only beacon of hope, Duque wouldn't have the confidence to control such a powerful demigod with a fickle personality. Moreover, Duque didn't trust the Eridar twins. It was indeed more suitable for Vashj to suppress them. Salolas, I want you to keep an eye on the tribe's bones. Salolas immediately understood. I'll focus my attention on the guys other than an Astrian. In a rare moment, Duke and Saloras looked at each other and smiled. It was good to have a smart subordinate. As a female demon who had personally come into contact with the Sun King, she could be said to have an extremely accurate grasp of the human heart. Since the Sun King wasn't willing to jump out immediately when Jaden descended and shout, "Welcome to the King's army," then he definitely wouldn't dare to personally make a move on such a small matter in no cent. Now, he had a very advantageous position. Back then, he had persuaded a few dreadlords to rebel against the Lich King. Afterwards, these few dreadlords followed him into the tribe. According to him, these guys were just like the demon pets enslaved by the warlock. They were very obedient. This was *T. Even Duke did not dare to say that he could completely control the Eridar Gemini. How could a mere breaking dawn from the Anastrian district dare to say that he could control a few dreadlords that were at least at the beginner stage of the Void Lord rank? He was already on Jaden's side, so it was reasonable for him to collude with the dreadlords. If anything happened, at worst, he would push the dreadlords out to take the blame. It didn't matter even if Sar didn't trust him. The tribe seriously lacked magic professions, and just relying on the tribe's second-rate warlocks wasn't enough. As long as he still had value, Sar wouldn't casually deal with him and his Forsaken subordinates. Letting Salolas monitor the Forsaken was like fighting poison with poison. The only thing that made Duque a little uncertain was Arthas' next move. Arthas, who had already become a Lich King, was extremely arrogant. Back then, Duque had slapped him in the face, once broke his hand, once chopped his waist, and even robbed Jaina. With Arthas' personality, he definitely wouldn't be able to take this lying down. Now, as expected, the plague that spread the scourge had come. However, in the face of Salola's methods, the few weaklings from the cursing sect quickly confessed how many times their former boss had been to the brothel. Moreover, the Alliance had recently implemented the strictest quarantine system. Any food that was over 100 kilograms had to be personally inspected by a cleric before it could be circulated in the market. Furthermore, it was inspected once a day. This move of the Scourge army had tricked the Horde, and the Alliance was unharmed. At the same time, the Alliance also managed to gain a wave of reputation. When the Holy Knights publicly burned the cultists of the cursing sect, together with the food that had been corrupted by the plague, outside the main cities, the people's calls for battle reached its peak. This level of conspiracy was at most harassment. Originally, in history, Naxxramas had once again visited the territories of the Alliance and the Horde, announcing the return of the Lich King with death and destruction. Now, Naxxramas had nothing to do with the two idiots. Duque had put a lot of effort into the Flying Fortress, making this fortress no less inferior to Duque's own Mage Tower. Only an idiot would think of attacking Naxxramas by force. Otherwise, avoiding a flying fortress directly under the jurisdiction of a demigod would be the right thing to do. Of course, Duque couldn't take Naxxramas to the Ice-Crown Fortress. Although Naxxramas was easy to use, it had a fatal flaw. It wasn't on any source of magic. Although the characteristics of the Titan creations allowed it to float in the air with only a small amount of energy. In order to maintain its floating state, it ultimately relied on the support of Duque's weave. The Ice-Crown Fortress was located on the largest elemental passage between the Frost Elemental Realm and Azeroth. Who was strong and who was weak, it was clear at a glance. At this time, Vashj swayed her waist, walked over, and gently massaged Duque's shoulders, reminding Duque, men always want face. Chapter 1547. Duque's heart skipped a beat. Vashj's reminder was indeed useful. The Alliance's current territory was too large. If they wanted to bully the lower tribes, the Alliance's military strength was definitely enough. To defend against the Lich King, who stood at the top of the demigod level, the Alliance's current defense was not enough. If Arthas personally came to destroy their homes, not to mention small towns, except for the Dalajan who could attack and defend, most of the capital cities would not be able to do so. Excluding Duque's Karazhan, at most, the Watchtower, as well as the Fearless Fortress and Naxxramas, which were under construction, could withstand it. Wherever Arthas appeared, the entire airspace would be dominated by frost elements. Unless Duque personally made a move, no one would be able to teleport over. Demigods were not easy to make a move. After killing Jaden with a big move, Ilun had already spoken, telling Duque to take it easy. The great power used by the true gods of Azeroth and demigods was, after all, the energy of planet Azeroth. If it was overused, it would hurt the vitality of planet Azeroth. The last time he killed Thun, the planet's vitality had already been greatly damaged. It was in the recovery period and could not afford to make any more trouble. Damn. Duque could not make a move casually, and conversely, Arthas did not dare to leave Northrend casually. Without the geographical bonus of that icy and snowy continent, would Arthas dare to fight him, Duque, when he had the geographical advantage? This was a big question mark. There were many strong people on the other side who could come out and cause trouble, but there were only a few who had the deterrent power of a nuclear strike. Vasht's reminder was very good. Since it was impossible to predict the enemy's target, he would use the enemy's weakness and force the enemy to hit the designated target. Duque tilted his head and smiled at Vasht. Vasht understood at that moment and bent down to move closer to Duque. Duque did not have any desire. He only caressed her smooth face and gently said, "Since I casually changed your fate back then, and you have chosen to follow me now, I swear I will let you live a good life." Vasht smiled faintly and gently held Duque's hand, rubbing it. "Being able to serve Master is my greatest wish." She put her mind in the right place. She had arrived too late and missed the rise of Duque. If she couldn't enter a man's heart during his difficult times, then the weight of this woman in a man's heart would always be limited. This was a matter of timing. Once missed, there would be no more opportunities. The three Windrunner sisters, Tyrande, Jaina, Ilucia and Kalia, these seven had an unshakable position in Duque's harem. Vasht could only play the role that was most considerate and could help Duque the most. Only then could she ensure her position. At the very least, she would be the number one person in the harem. At this point, she had more and more hope of success. Duque calmed his mind and sent a magic message. Soon, the portal at the top of the Karazhan Tower opened, and Jaina's beautiful figure appeared. Before Jaina entered Duke's study, Vasht obediently performed a maid's salute and retreated. "Good day, madam." Vasht bowed to Jaina as she left. "Hello, Sileka." "Thank you, madam." Just the details of how they addressed each other was enough for the two to complete a friendly exchange. Jaina had not married Duque yet, so calling her Majesty or Lady Proudmoore would seem too distant. Calling her Madam was a compliment to Jaina and an acknowledgement of her position in Duque's harem. Jaina called Vasht Sileka because she acknowledged her special position by Duque's side. The two brushed past each other. Jaina closed the door after entering the room and went straight to the point. "Is it about Arthas? Is she going to provoke him again? Will it succeed?" Jaina was very smart and immediately guessed the key point. Back in the Fellwood Forest, Jaina did not have any psychological burden after messing with Arthas once. It was just that she did not think that Arthas would kneel in the same place twice. Duque shook his head. "No, it was barely successful back then. Now that Arthas has merged with Nuzul's will, it is even more impossible to succeed. He is calmer now." "Huh? Then what should we do?" Jaina very naturally walked around Duque's desk and sat on Duque's lap. Duque smiled and completed the posture of carrying her. "Doesn't Arthas never forget that he is the master of Lordaeron?" Jaina naturally understood. "Then I will visit Lordaeron?" Duque smirked and kissed Jaina. "I will go in private. We will go this far together. Lordaeron used to be the only pearl of the Alliance. After Arthas killed his father 15 years after the Dark Portal, Lordaeron once fell and became a city of death. After that, Anastrian occupied it for a short time and almost turned it into a city of darkness, which then became a tumor in the Alliance. Fortunately, when Lordaeron was on the verge of destruction, Duque first brought out Kalia Menethil, the legitimate heir. Later, he organized an army of the Alliance to drive away the Sun King, which led to the revival of Lordaeron. 10 years had passed. Almost the entire land of the eastern and western plaguelands had now been decayed. Now, with the help of Tyrant and Malfurion, and the help of the druids of the Cenarian Circle, the rotten soil was finally purified. Those that could not be purified were all taken to the endless sea and thrown into the great whirlpool. Kalia discussed with the ministers and renamed the eastern and western plaguelands to the Eastern and Western Holy Light. This name was actually quite suitable for the current situation. After all, in the former eastern plaguelands, there was the holy city of Stratholme, which had changed history, and the Holy Light's Hope Chapel. In the western plaguelands, there was Uther's tomb in the south of Endoril, which had been destroyed by the Calamity Army. With the support of Duque and Kalia, Tyrion Fordring and Gavin Rad-Doom, the only two remaining 5 Silver Sages, had changed Endoril into the headquarters of the Silver Hand Knights. There were more than 10,000 knights stationed there for a long time. There was also a mechanized corps composed entirely of humans, with 600 tanks of various types and 30 flying battleships. There was also a Dalajan mages, as well as more than 1,000 paladins or paladin apprentices. It was precisely because they had suffered the greatest destruction and degradation that the people of Lordaeron had the strongest will of the Holy Light. In front of the teleportation portal of New Lordaeron City, the royal knights were lined up neatly, holding their shining swords high. They welcomed the visiting Queen Kertiras with the most orderly military formation amidst the music. Sister Kalia, Sister Gianna, the two beautiful queens hugged each other warmly. Unlike the formal greetings between the heads of state, their special identities as members of Duque's harem made them really close like sisters. Even the most picky person would not be able to find any trace of hypocrisy when looking at them. The new nobles of Lordaeron looked at them with pure admiration on their faces. Chapter 1548. The queen was as beautiful as a painting. She aged quickly, and no matter how beautiful a woman's looks were, they would only last 10 years. These two, on the other hand, were immortal and youthful. Kalia's pure and exquisite face still retained a strong girlish aura. Her doll-like face and figure made her look like the most perfect work of art, to be looked at from afar but not to be desecrated. As the elemental aura around Jaina grew denser, apart from her natural intellectual beauty, there was now an additional layer of psychedelic color, making her look even more mysterious. Moreover, their elegant temperament and noble status naturally made the hearts of the entire continent's bachelors fall in love with them. If a mortal could obtain the favor of one of them, or even just a single night at their bedside, it would be enough for them to brag about for a lifetime. Unfortunately, such women were destined not to be stolen by mortals. Their common man was Duke Marcus, the Alliance's great hero, supreme commander, and one of the few genuine demigods in Azeroth. Since it was impossible to possess, there was only praise and recognition. Perhaps a subject who caught the eye of Her Majesty the Queen would be granted eternal life. That was what they were aiming for. For example, Edwin Van Cleef had been a mere stonemason back in Stormwind. Once upon a time, the nobles of Stormwind and even the entire Alliance had looked down on this low-born thief and stonemason, saying that he was written as a marquis, but read as a country bumpkin. They even mocked him for wanting to marry his daughter off to a noble. As time went on, everyone changed their opinions. These days, there were more and more experts who could enter the realm of heroes. Gradually, there were various classifications of heroes. The lowest was the ordinary hero, and above that was the epic hero and the legendary hero. According to the latest classification, Edwin, as the father, was epic, while his daughter, Vanessa, was already a legendary hero. Marrying off his daughter to a noble was a mortal's idea. The truly amazing thing was to send his daughter to be a maid under Duque's command. It was true that the Marcus family's status had risen with Duke's advancement. Didn't they see that even the maids were leveling up? When Vanessa had been a maid for the Marcus family, she was just a girl with better skills. Later on, the one who wanted to be a maid was already a radiant moon great astromancer, Solarian. Recently, with Vash's allegiance, everyone suddenly discovered that only a demigod could become Marcus family's maid. Countless nobles beat their chests and stamped their feet in regret. Fortunately, be it the Rotterdam Kingdom or Stormwind, the nobles of the entire alliance had basically been purged once or twice for various reasons. Some of the nobles who were able to survive until today were new nobles who rose to power after the first battle at the Dark Portal. The remaining nobles who came from the old era were mostly new nobles who had accepted the thinking of the new era. Everyone also understood that the era of relying on bloodline was over. Only by taking on more responsibilities and making more contributions could Azeroth continue to exist and everyone live a better life. Moreover, under Duque's leadership, the alliance became stronger and stronger. Everyone personally witnessed that. The Horde, which had been a serious threat to the survival of the alliance, had been left far behind. The economic, livelihood, military, and other areas of the cake were getting bigger and bigger. Everyone was getting a bigger share, so there was nothing to be dissatisfied about. Hence, even though they were fighting for it, it was still generally in a positive atmosphere. During the meeting, Jaina felt the friendly gazes from the nobles. She teased, "Sister Kalia, it seems that your control over the country is quite good. I'm in trouble. I have to earn money all day and then build ships so that those guys don't complain. Don't tease me, you rich lady of Azeroth. Even I want to rob you of your private stash." Kalia hooked Jaina's little nose. Take it. What's mine is yours too." Jaina hooked Kalia's arm and teased her as they walked into the palace. On this day, the meeting between the two beautiful queens became the topic of conversation for all the citizens of Rotterdam after they ate and drank. 25 years ago, the Rotterdam Kingdom gave people the feeling that it was still an extremely backward Middle Ages. With the large-scale promotion of magic communication, the beautiful scene of the Queen's meeting was almost simultaneously spread to the entire Rotterdam Kingdom and the Alliance. This was the foreign version of the news broadcast that Duque had single-handedly created. After entering the Rotterdam Kingdom, the two queens talked and laughed as they entered the bedroom. After Kalia asked the servants to leave, a portal opened in the bedroom that was supposed to be in a state of space shielding. Duque walked out of the portal with a smile. "You're here. You've been hiding in Karazhan lately and rarely come to see me." Kalia pouted and pouted. Although she said that, she leaned over and offered her red lips directly. "Aren't I here now?" Duque took the opportunity to taste the fragrant lips of this beautiful queen who always maintained a pure heart. Immediately after, Duque hugged Jaina and gave her a kiss. Favoring one and discriminating against the other was a big taboo in the harem. Kalia asked, "Arthas, will his men come?" "Because he's Arthas." Duque's answer was more like a tongue twister. In fact, this was a judgment made based on Arthas's character. Arthas was not simply brainwashed and joined the Scourge army, and then became the Lich King. He was Nizul, who patiently tempted him step by step, pushing his soul into the abyss, and finally achieving the end of the fall. The advantage of this was that Arthas would not be like the other paladins who were forcibly turned into Death Knights. Once their control was slightly weakened, they would immediately rebel and turn their spears against the Scourge army. The disadvantage was also obvious. Arthas retained his previous memories, personality, and way of doing things. In a sense, after completely merging with Nizul's soul, it was to gain the advantages of both of them. For example, Arthas was more courageous than Nizul, and the merged Lich King was no longer a coward. Another example was that Arthas could obtain Nizul's mind full of shadow magic and become a true dual practitioner of magic and martial arts. However, even with the integration of the advantages of both of them, such a Lich King could still not be said to be perfect. In the end, the two of them were born with too many flaws. In theory, if they merged with the soul of another strong person, the effect would be better. Unfortunately, souls were not things that could be merged just because they wanted to, and souls that were too weak had no value in merging. It took Arthas almost 10 years to perfectly merge with Nizul. No one knew what the result would be and how long it would take to merge with another one. What's more, Duque would not give them this time. The fearless stronghold was being built in full swing. With the Alliance's hands free, If Arthas did not fight back, the shameless Duque did not mind building fortresses all the way to the entrance of the Ice Crown Fortress, and then having a fortress against a fortress. Well, with Naxxramas, a total of 2 fortresses against 1 Ice Crown Fortress. Chapter 1549. In a sense, this was a counterattack that Arthas had to make under the pressure of the general situation. It couldn't be helped. The general situation was in Duque's hands. If he didn't want to lose even his pants, Arthas had to take the risk. However, he retained his memory and part of his humanity, and Arthas' weakness was fully exploited by Duque. Arthas had always claimed that he was the king of Lordaeron and the only legitimate ruler of the kingdom. But now, the one wearing the crown of Lordaeron was his most beloved sister. Tyrinas had never cared much about the siblings, and only kept making demands and criticizing him. Every night when he dreamed of his father, he still didn't think that killing his father was a mistake. Kalia was different. His mother died early, and as his sister, Kalia was the last harbor of his soul. If he had known that his sister was not dead, he might not have fallen. After all, in his heart, it was his father's greed for Alterax's land that led to Nethario, the Wing of Death, and his sister's death. But before he fell into a deep sleep, he knew that Kalia was not dead. 10 years had passed, and when he woke up, he found out about a series of shocking things. Duke had not only taken care of his beloved childhood sweetheart, Jaina, but he had also clearly eaten his biological sister at the same time. The man who had stolen his woman had become his cheap brother-in-law in the blink of an eye, and he hadn't even been given a public status. This contradiction, anger, and entanglement. If Arthas were still a living person, she would probably be tormented to the point of insanity. This terrible situation had become a problem that he could never get rid of from his soul. To become a purer Lich King, he had to completely abandon his humanity. The cruel part of his soul that belonged to Nuzul was driving him, and his reason told him that this meeting between the 2 queens was a trap. So what if it's a trap? Thousands of miles apart, the 2 men who could stir up a storm in this era said the same thing. The only difference was that Arthas was sitting on an ice throne made of frost elements, while Duke was lying on the soft velvet bed, looking at Kalia, who was wearing white silk, and Jaina, who was wearing black silk, intertwined with each other as they slept. That night, dark clouds covered the sky, and there was no moon in the sky. The radiance of Elune did not reach the ground at all. In the pitch-black land of Rotterdam, even the brightest lighthouse looked like a firefly in the dark. Heaven and earth were covered by a hazy mist. In the sky, a large ice bone dragon led a group of ice dragons, continuously flapping its wings that had long lost their membranes and were only left with a skeleton. They charged into the sky of the Rotterdam kingdom at high speed. These lifeless bone dragons relied on shadow magic to fly, not their wings. All the movements of flapping their wings were just a habit left over from when they were alive. Everyone attack. We have to kill our way in before the magic defense system of Lordaeron City is activated. We have to punish those who refuse to accept the honor of the Lich King's death. Announce the return of the Scourge army with the bloodiest massacre. The one leading them was the former Blue Dragon Queen, Sindagosa. 15 years ago, she had been resurrected by Nuzul and saved Arthas. Ever since then, she had been the most loyal guard of the Ice Crown Fortress. Tonight, as the most powerful assault force under Arthas, she led the Ice Dragons, who had also been resurrected by the Lich King, to carry out a surprise attack in the night. Don't worry. As long as we suppress our elemental waves, those puny humans won't be able to find us before we enter their visual range. Sindagosa announced to her subordinates. The night was the best cover, to begin with. Coupled with the fact that it was a dark night filled with dark clouds, the ice dragons shuttled through the thick layers of clouds, adjusting their course purely by sensing the aura of the living. She did not believe that the slow and low-flying griffins or hippogriffs could detect the ice dragon army thousands of meters in the sky. In theory, that was true. Be it Sindagosa or Arthas, with their outdated knowledge, they could not imagine the drastic changes of the times. In the city of Rotterdam, not many people noticed that in the barracks in the 4 directions of the city, there were a few huge metal pans that kept spinning. Even more so, no one realized that this thing would bring about epical changes. Theon watched as a bunch of low-ranked mages fiddled with magic equipment that he did not recognize, and then reported sets of data that he did not understand at all. He sighed deeply. Times have changed. Not far behind him, Duque stood with his hands behind his back and smiled. Indeed, times had changed. After experimenting with the sonar system in the Outer Realms, radar was naturally placed on the Alliance's research agenda. Duque wanted to push forward with this project as soon as possible, but unfortunately, no matter how many ideas he threw out, the gnomes and dwarven scientists were also working hard to help him realize all kinds of inventions that were like black technology to this world. The industrial base of this world still restricted the development of all kinds of new technologies. For example, radar. Although the Alliance already had diesel engines, they were pure machinery. Electrification, on the other hand, was a completely different matter. Duque had used the rotating electromagnetic coils to create a generator for the Alliance, but there was still a long way to go before he could create a stable electronic radar. Fortunately, in addition to technology, there was also magic in this world. Duque could link the weave and make each node of the weave emit weak elemental waves at a fixed time and frequency. The Ice Dragon army, who did not know, thought it was natural elemental waves. In fact, the missing and feedback of each elemental wave had been collected by the elemental radar at each node. After a long period of training, these Earth mages, who had been unable to advance further in the field of magic, found a new life value in this special field. Elemental reactions confirmed. For the time being, there are 114 confirmed reactions. Direction 5 degrees west-northwest, speed 71 kilometers per hour, and still accelerating. Griffin Brigade of the 1st Air Force of Rotterdam, asking if they want to intercept it? In the newly established Air Force Command of Rotterdam, it was a scene of bustle. The noise made traditional knights like Tyrion and Gavin Rad confused. Finding the enemy through radar and commanding the Air Force was a headache even for Kudrin Wildhammer, the #1 person in the Alliance's Air Force. Yet Duque the Transmigrator did it well. Faced with the inquiries of his subordinates, Duque shook his head. Griffin Brigade, don't go. It's a pointless waste of combat power. Order the Brothel Brigade to get into formation and fire according to the shooting elements I provided. Listen to my command and fire in sequence. 3, 2, 1. Launch the flare. The Ice Dragon army, who had been traveling at high speed through the dark clouds, suddenly saw their eyes light up as a violent shock wave spread through the clouds above their heads. The next moment, it was as bright as day above them. That's impossible. Sindagosa was shocked. The sun seemed to be very strong tonight. Chapter 1550. Almost at the same time, Kalia, who was sleeping soundly in the palace of the Rotterdam Kingdom, suddenly raised her long eyelashes, and her sapphire-like eyes lit up. Just as Kalia was about to move, she suddenly realized that Jaina was hugging her even tighter. Jaina whispered into Kalia's ear, "Sister Kalia, you're not being good. Leave everything to Duque." Kalia understood everything at once. She was a little confused, but soon blushed with happiness. So, Duque has already arranged everything. He's such a gentle person. As the queen of the Rotterdam Kingdom, she naturally had the responsibility of guarding the land. Duque took over the defense and deliberately tortured her in the first half of the night to exhaust her physical strength. He didn't want her to know that her beloved brother had sent powerful subordinates to kill her and destroy the kingdom that had been passed down for 2,800 years. Unfortunately, with the improvement of Kalia's strength, she was already infinitely close to the level of an archbishop. Not only did her physique improve a lot, but she was also extremely sensitive to elemental fluctuations. Not to mention the overwhelming explosion of frost elemental spells. However, tonight, Kalia was willing to be Duque's woman again, and not the queen of a kingdom. She entered a sweet dream, and what appeared in the beautiful dream was the beautiful rose of ice and fire that Duque had given her when she first met him. It was an otherworldly beauty. There was actually quite a commotion 10 kilometers away from the Rotterdam Kingdom. With the accurate shooting of the flares, All the ice dragons appeared in front of the various monitoring stations, and the lookouts with binoculars kept reporting the location of the ice dragons. Then, the battleships of the royal brothel launched a fierce bombardment. It was a terrifying rain of cannons that spanned nearly 10,000 meters. The cannonballs pierced through the sky, and countless arcs of light with terrifying power were drawn in the night sky. Although the ice dragons were essentially undead, and their resistance to physical damage was quite high, the Calamity Army, who was uninformed, did not know that the Alliance had long installed a large number of blessings of holy light cannonballs. The cannonballs that exploded not only had physical damage, but also had the dual attributes of fire elemental and holy light. Ice Dragon's ice shield was easily broken like a soap bubble. In just one face-to-face encounter, more than 30 bone dragons had unfortunately been directly hit by multiple cannonballs. The destructive power was so terrifying that it was beyond Syndagosa's imagination. It blew up the bone dragon with its incomparably tough bones in one go. The sturdy bones that even the orc's axes couldn't even leave a white mark on them were smashed into pieces like rotten wood. The bone fragments that emitted a large amount of frost elements bloomed in the sky of the Rotterdam kingdom like snowflakes that were blown away by the wind. "Impossible!" Syndagosa exclaimed. "Disperse! Spread out!" The ice dragons in the sky had completely lost their formation. They tried to control the elements around them that had become chaotic and maintained their flying state. Some of them fluttered their wings and flew up, some turned around rapidly, and some dove down. With all kinds of dodging movements, the second wave of shells only caused limited damage. About 7 ice dragons were destroyed, and the rest were mostly lightly injured. "Idiot! Do you think this is the end?" With a cold announcement, Syndagosa suddenly realized that a night elf in a pure white priest's robe had raised her hands high in the sky to the east. Holy and holy radiance blossomed from her body. The divine might of the moon goddess Elun also descended in the next second. It was another meteor-like object that fell from the sky, but this time it was not cannonballs, but meteorites from the void battlefield. Under the guidance of High Priest Tyrant of the Shrine of the Moon and the restraint of the divine power of the moon goddess, meteorites of various sizes broke through the atmosphere and hit the ice dragons with terrifying kinetic energy. The humorous WMs, whose bodies were extremely tough, were hit by the terrifying meteor fall. They immediately exploded like building blocks that had been kicked apart. "No!" Syndagosa let out an angry howl of the soul. Ice dragons were not ordinary WMs. They were all blue dragons that had been killed on the spot when Nisario betrayed the Dragon Sleep Shrine. Only dead blue dragons could become ice dragons. Hence, every time an ice dragon was destroyed, there would be one less ice dragon. There were not many adult blue dragons left in the Blue Dragon Legion. How could there be so many ice dragons to replenish? Syndagosa was infuriated. She screamed, urging the strongest of the ice dragons to attack Tyrant with her. "You want to hurt Sister Tyrant? You have to get past me first." Sylvanas appeared, riding Veristaz, the once extremely powerful red dragon. The power of the artifact, Wrath of the Stars, was maximized in her hands. If the cannonballs and meteor fall could still be seen, Queen Sylvanas's divine arrows were so fast that it was almost impossible to see them with the naked eye. The souls of the ice dragons trembled. They instinctively wanted to dodge the divine arrows that represented destruction and destruction. Unfortunately, dodging was too difficult for the ice dragons with their huge bodies. When they were alive, they still had hard scales, tough dragon skin, and muscles to protect them. Now, once their bodies were destroyed, it would be their doomsday. Once their souls, filled with hatred and anger, lost their corpses, all that awaited them was complete dissipation. Syndagosa was furious. She opened her hideous mouth wide, making the fangs in her mouth even sharper. "You're just a crippled ancient dragon." Yes, she was dead, so dead that only her bones remained. But as an ancient dragon personally resurrected by the Lich King, she had more ice elemental circuits carved into her body than any other ice dragon. Perhaps her melee abilities were not as good as when she was alive, but her control over the elements was better than before. In front of her, Valistaz was really not enough. Unexpectedly, Queen Sylvanas laughed. I'm only responsible for stopping others from getting close to Sister Tyrant. Sindagosa, your opponent, is her. Queen Sylvanas pointed her right index finger at the sky. Roar! A domineering dragon roar rang out. A huge creature was descending from the void above the atmosphere at high speed. It swooped down with its huge wings, which were like black clouds in the sky. Every time it flapped its wings, the clouds that were stirred up were reminiscent of a terrifying storm. Like a meteor, it flew diagonally through the atmosphere. The crimson color on its wings told everyone that it was terrifyingly hot. There was no need to spit out dragon breath. The air turbulence caused by the flapping of its wings was already filled with crimson sparks that flew everywhere. At a glance in the dark, one would think that it was the Red Dragon Queen, Alexstrasza, the giver of life. However, the blackness that seemed to come from the deepest and farthest abyss told others that she was the current Earth aspect dragon, Onyxia. Chapter 1551. Oh, is the food in the void that good? I think you've gotten fatter. Duque's magical message was sent directly into Onyxia's ears. Bastard master, this is the power of that damn dragon aspect. I don't like it at all. Onyxia began to complain on the spot. Good. Thank you for your hard work. Finish it quickly. Despite her complaints, Onyxia was becoming more and more self-righteous. Looking at Sindagosa, Onyxia suddenly felt like she was in a trance. Thinking back to the fate that Duque had shown her, she subconsciously compared the tragic fate that she should have suffered to this blue dragon queen, who was filled with tragedy. If I continue to walk the path of evil, perhaps this will be my fate? She was not a kind dragon to begin with, and her so-called sigh only lasted for a second. When she became serious, her black vertical pupils, which were wrapped in golden yellow, only had a coldness that seemed to belong to the ruler of all living things. As the mount of the god of fate, she looked down at yet another pitiful creature that had fallen into the trap of fate. Sindagosa, since that bastard Maligos isn't willing to come, then let me do it for him and end everything. Don't mention that filthy name. Sindagosa let out a shrill dragon roar and pounced forward. His wings, which were devoid of beauty and only had bone spikes, spread out, and even the surrounding air trembled slightly. After explosively spraying out frost elements, Sindagosa's huge body shot into the sky like an arrow, heading straight for Onyxia. The world of frost elements was connected to the real world through the evil magic runes on her body. For a moment, it was as if two different spaces had overlapped. You're already dead, so don't wander around. Do you know? You're an eyesore. Onyxia was furious as well. She flapped her huge black wings, and the wind pressure created a terrifying storm in the air. Even from a few hundred meters away, Tyrant's Hippogriphon was still blown around. She had no choice but to pull on the reins and have the Hippogriphon retreat further. The sky was the domain of the birds of prey and dragons. Any existence that attempted to defeat dragons in close combat would have to pay a terrible price. It wasn't just Tyrant. Even Queen Sindagosa retreated. One life, one death. One white, the other black. One was ice, the other was fire. The two dragons collided with each other in midair. At that moment, the pitch-black sky was filled with the purest elemental radiance. Half of the night sky was densely covered with fiery red flame patterns that carried a holy aura, while the other half of the night sky was filled with layers of overlapping snow-white frost elemental runes. Two utterly different scenes separated the entire sky. At the beginning, it was just a small region of elements colliding with each other. Soon, as a large number of elements were drawn in from the elements realm, they constantly collided with each other. The overflowing ice and fire elements began to spread in all directions. With the two dragons fighting fiercely as the center, it was as if time had stopped for a moment, and then a huge shockwave like a mushroom cloud spread out. The shockwave, thousands of meters high in the sky, even swept across the land that was plunged into darkness below, rolling up dead leaves and sand that filled the sky. In the command center, Theon asked Duque, "Can Onyxia win?" Duque rubbed his chin casually. Although she always lacks fighting spirit, she believes that when she stands on the winning side, She will always be the winner. To be honest, from the moment Sindagosa led his army into the skies of Lordaeron, Arthas' attack this time was destined to fail. Theon sighed. That's why we admire you. You've always tried your best to decide the outcome of a war before the battle even starts. Those of us on the front lines, even if we know that we're just going through the motions, are willing to fight. Duque smiled bitterly. You think too highly of me. Gavin Rad also came up and patted Duque on the shoulder. Boss, don't be so humble. We're all thinking that if you can always be so brilliant, it wouldn't matter even if you lead the Alliance for 100 or 1,000 years. Duque's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know how to describe this feeling. What did a great man say in the past? Absolute power leads to absolute corruption. Duque had always thought of himself as a layman. Even now that he had stepped into the divine realm, he still didn't feel like a true god. He had become a demigod more out of a desire for power. However, this desire was only based on the goal of defeating the Burning Legion. What would happen after defeating the Burning Legion? Perhaps Azeroth would already be very peaceful? Would he still have the drive and the sense of urgency he had now, and put all his thoughts on promoting the world forward? The answer was obviously no. Thinking of this, Duque smiled and shook his head. No, my term as commander will only last until the Burning Legion is defeated. The day of the decisive battle between Azeroth and the Burning Legion that I saw in the River of Fate is not far from now. As he spoke, Duque raised his hands and put up 10 fingers. 10 years. 10 years at most. The Legion will launch a general attack on Azeroth. Whether the world can survive, and whether our children can have a future, depends on the next 10 years. Duque's words caused the surrounding people to be moved. Gavin Rad was the first to laugh. It's just 10 years. I've been with you for 25 years since I was 20, boss. 10 more years won't make a difference. If I feel like I can't fight anymore, then please give me that. Anyway, when I'm 80, even if I don't die, I'll kill myself. Theon raised Ashbringer in his hand. Alexandros passed it on to me, and I won't let him down. If I can't fight anymore, I'll be like him and pass on this divine artifact as a spark of hope. Duque smiled. The 5 Silver Saints. It's not time to retire from the stage of history. For some reason, I have a hunch that Turayan and Saidan aren't dead yet. When we fight the Burning Legion, they'll definitely run out of nowhere, crying and begging to join us. Hearing this, Theon and Gavin Rad froze for a moment, and then smiled brightly. They weren't sure, but their intuition told them that Duque must have confirmed something from the River of Fate, and was using this obscure method to encourage them. While they were chatting, the outcome of the massive battle in midair had been decided. The result was not surprising at all. Bone dragons didn't have an advantage in hand-to-hand combat after losing their muscles and skin scales. The ice elemental magic circuit that the Lich King had given her wasn't her own, after all. Sindagosa, who didn't have the upper hand in the elemental duel, was seized by Xianxia and struck her in the waist with her dragon tail. With the crisp sound of bones breaking, she screamed and fell from the air. Chapter 1552. Surprisingly, Xianxia didn't pursue him immediately. Instead, the Lordaeron Command Center received a magical message from her. Bombard Sindagosa. The coordinates are. After Xianxia reported the coordinates in one breath, the female mage in charge of magical communication was stunned for a full 2 seconds and couldn't react. What? Didn't you hear? Did the magical communication get disrupted? Only then did the female mage come to her senses and repeat the coordinates, which were quickly conveyed to the Royal Brothel Regiment. The female mage was not to be blamed. After all, in everyone's impression, the dragons were the most conservative and stubborn. They could hold onto the orders left behind by the Titans and guard Azeroth for a full 25,000 years without changing. Naturally, the others would not have thought that Xianxia could play with cannons so smoothly. What's there to be surprised about? It's not like we're fighting for time. I have to take the risk of having my beautiful scales scraped off to deal with an ugly bone dragon? I won't do it. The Black Dragon Princess's words could be said to be willful and cold. Even Duque's facial muscles stiffened when he heard it. He then smiled bitterly. That was good. He could try to see how effective modern cannons were against powerful creatures of the second highest tier. Onyxia's dragon tail sweep had an impact force of at least 10 tons. Even if it hit the walls of Lordaeron, it probably wouldn't be able to take more than 2 hits. Syndagosa's strength lay in her spell-casting ability, not her hand-to-hand combat ability. When there was such a being that could ignore her various frost attribute attacks, she was nothing much. In that regard, Onyxia, who was already a dragon aspect, was her absolute nemesis. The black dragon was a fire elemental, unlike her big brother, who used the shadow flame attribute. After going through a special dragon ritual in the Wormrest Shrine and being a dragon aspect, her fire abilities became stronger. Syndagosa's Frost Tomb, Frost Halo, and other skills could torture the Alliance's hero squad to death, but they couldn't hurt Onyxia. This was a battle of pure elemental abilities. When magic couldn't decide the outcome, melee combat would be the key to victory. How could a sluggish former demigod-tier dragon defeat a living guardian dragon? Wasn't the answer obvious? Syndagosa struggled to climb out of the crater she had made in the ground. Onyxia's attack was indeed a heavy blow, but it wasn't enough to completely destroy her. As soon as she climbed up, she stretched her neck towards the sky and let out an angry roar. Then, she spoke in draconic language. When translated, it basically meant, "Little girl, you're not qualified to teach me a lesson." Onyxia's reply was a very anthropomorphic smiley face. It was hard to imagine how a dragon with such a terrifying face could make an expression similar to hee. She did it and even expressed the meaning of, "You have a lot of ideas." The next moment, Syndagosa knew what his opponent meant. Whoosh! The familiar ear-piercing whistling of the wind could be heard. Before she could do anything, hundreds of tons of artillery shells rained down on her head. When she was at her peak, these artillery shells wouldn't be a problem at all. The so-called artillery shells had to hit the target and trigger the firing pin and fuse in the shell to explode. Previously, Syndagosa had used her unparalleled icy aura to freeze all the artillery shells within a 500-meter radius around her. The firing pin was frozen, and the explosives connected to the fuse could no longer explode. All the artillery shells turned into metal lumps and fell straight to the ground. But now, the intense clash between the ice and fire elemental domains had consumed almost all of her magic power. Furthermore, much of the magic circuits on her body had been destroyed by Onyxia in melee combat. She was now a pure bone dragon, and a half-crippled one at that. This time, the air fleet, which had been stifled for so long, finally struck gold. The artillery shells rained down on the area where Syndagosa was, and in an instant, the barren hillside was shaved off by 1 or 2 meters. That's enough. After Onyxia's transmission, the fleet ceased fire in satisfaction. Onyxia dove down, and with the acceleration from free fall and her own acceleration, she reached an extreme speed of over 200 kilometers per hour. The tremendous kinetic energy fell on the struggling Syndagosa, and the first blow broke the already fragile dragon's spine in 2. Not giving her opponent any chance, Onyxia flung Syndagosa's severed lower body away with her tail. Her 4 dragon claws latched onto her opponent's bony wings, shoulder blades, and neck. Her dragon mouth accurately bit down on the neck below the bone dragon's skull, and with all her might, she tore at it. Ah! Syndagosa's soulfire let out the most tragic wail. Then, her huge dragon skull was bitten off. Bah! Onyxia spat out the dragon skull and used her claws to pry open the remaining ribs of Syndagosa's upper body. At almost 0 distance, she used her ultimate move against the dark blue soulfire on the bone dragon's chest. Onyxia took a deep breath. It was a classic move that made countless players' scalps go numb. Deep breath. The scorching heat melted the nearby sand into a translucent glass-like substance. Not to mention Syndagosa, who bore the brunt of the attack. After adding another dragon breath to the soulfire on Syndagosa's skull, Onyxia grabbed the skull with her claws and flew unhurriedly towards the command center in Lordaeron. Under the focus of the magic searchlights, Onyxia, who was larger than before, slowly flapped her wings and descended. She casually threw Syndagosa's skull into an empty space, and under the gaze of thousands of Alliance soldiers, she once again became Countess Katrana. The Alliance recruits who hadn't seen this scene let out cries of surprise. If it were the Black Dragon Princess of the past, she would definitely be pissed. But now, she pretended not to hear it. Gently holding the hem of her red dress with both hands, Xianxia came before Duque and the higher-ups of the Alliance. She knelt on one knee and said in a clear voice, "My beloved lord, your mount, the Earth Aspect Dragon Xianxia, has completed the mission you assigned and successfully killed the fallen Blue Dragon Queen, Sindagosa. She has returned to report." Her words caused a commotion among the surrounding Alliance soldiers. What was cool? This was what it meant to be cool. Queen Sindorii next door had an ancient red dragon mount, and those elves were so arrogant. Compared to them, we humans are the truly awesome ones. Just look at Commander Duke Marcus. He stepped into the divine realm as a mortal, and even used a Earth Aspect Dragon as a mount. Faced with the cheers of 666 from the onlookers, Duque also felt proud. He smiled and said, "You will be rewarded, but we'll talk about it later." Xianxia, who had been serious just a moment ago, suddenly blushed. Chapter 1553. The pure people of Azeroth certainly couldn't understand the breadth and depth of Chinese culture. They hadn't been told about the pun, so they couldn't understand it even if they thought about it for the rest of their lives. Xianxia wasn't keen on exploring dragon caves, but she liked the feeling of relying on strategy to make the other party fall into a trap and win in the end. It was a kind of pleasure that the other party couldn't defy fate no matter how hard they struggled or resisted, and would eventually be destroyed. Standing on the side of the victor, standing under the banner of the god of fate, compared to this, it wasn't so unacceptable to suffer and become a mount for a while. Besides, after Duque stepped into the divine realm, she didn't lose face, and no other four-colored dragons would make things difficult for her because she became Duque's mount. It was a bit annoying to be forced to work when something happened, but when she had nothing to do, she could sleep on a dragon bed full of gold, and her days were quite comfortable. Xianxia, who had nothing to complain about, stood proudly beside Duque under the gaze of the Alliance soldiers. Duque nodded and then opened a magic communication mirror with Alexstrasza. Xianxia just killed Sindagosa, who had degenerated into an ice dragon. It was only a short sentence, but it was exchanged for 10 seconds of silence from the Red Dragon Queen. After a long time, she sighed. This matter shouldn't have been handled by the Dragon Slumber Temple. This time, it was Duque's turn to be silent. The Queen's silence was embarrassment, and Duque's was protest. "Please clean up the mess of the dragons yourselves." Alexstrasza didn't know what to say. At the end of the day, it was Malygos himself who wasn't kind. His wife had been seriously injured by Nesario, but he had run away in a lunatic. Well, she was dead, and she couldn't even return to the Dragonbone Waste where the dragons slept. She fell halfway, and her soul carried a deep resentment towards him. 10,000 years had passed. Even after killing Deathwing Nesario, and Duque repeatedly reminded him to pay attention to Sindagosa's remains and not be used by the Lich King, Malygos still didn't pick up his wife's 10,000-year-old bones because of his pride. Now, his dead wife and his former minister had been picked up to be an ice dragon. Malygos still did not care, sticking his head in the sand like an ostrich to escape reality. Alexstrasza, of course, could feel Duque's anger. She felt very guilty towards this demigod of Azeroth, who had helped the Dragon Slumber Shrine a lot and was now on equal footing with the Dragon Slumber Shrine. "I will send my subordinates to collect the remains of Sindagosa and his men, and use a soul pacification spell to suppress them in the Dragonbone Waste. I will also inform Malygos in the end." Duque's eyes narrowed into a line. To be honest, he was very dissatisfied. No one knew better than him what Malygos was doing at this point in history. To be honest, there was no cure for brain damage. Duque opened his mouth and said coldly, "You also know that we are now preparing to suppress the Lich King Arthas and his Scourge Legion. Since he even dared to desecrate the remains of dragons, I think the Dragon Slumber Shrine should be on the same side as the Alliance and the Horde." "That's right." Alexstrasza nodded heavily. "Is there anything the Dragon Slumber Shrine can do?" My Red Dragon Legion can be deployed soon. With Kill Jaden's heavy losses, the Burning Legion fell into chaos. Without the orders of their commander, the Void Lords were busy fighting for power. Naturally, no demons would foolishly run to the Void battlefield outside of Azeroth's atmosphere to die. Apart from the Blue Dragon Legion, which only had a few dragons left, and the Black Dragon Legion, which only had Onyxia left. In fact, as the main force of the Dragon Slumber Shrine, the Red Dragon Legion, Green Dragon Legion, and Bronze Dragon Legion were idle. The Green Dragon Legion benefited from Duque's reminder, and Isra used Elun's power to prevent the fall of Laythorn, Amolis, Tyrell, and Isidri, the 4 powerful dragons. The Green Dragon Legion could be said to have been saved. The Bronze Dragon Legion was still relatively strong at this time, because they had the responsibility of guarding the timeline and would not be transferred easily. It could be said that most of the dragons were bored to death. It was rare for Alexstrasza to take the initiative, so it would be a waste for Duque not to use her. However, Duque still had some concerns. Thank you for the help of the Red Dragon Legion, but I still have a worry. I'm afraid that Malygos will be unreasonable and say that I shouldn't have killed Sindagosa. You know, his brain is a bit. Duque's index finger shook his temple. The queen was also having a hard time. On one side was a powerful ally like Duque, and on the other side was her own brother. She was caught in the middle, unable to do anything. Duque emphasized, to be honest, I've always had deep doubts about whether Malygos is sane or not. In my opinion, any action that might destroy Azeroth is unacceptable. I've already given in regarding the Sunwell. Now is a critical moment in the upcoming war with the Scourge. If Malygos abandons his duty and attacks me, Onyxia, or the Alliance because of Sindagosa, I won't rule out the possibility of killing him myself. As soon as Duque finished speaking, both the Alliance and Onyxia, who was standing beside him, were in awe. What was responsibility? That was responsibility. Being able to beat up the enemy and protect his underlings. Only this kind of boss was truly worthy of dying for. Even though Alexstrasza had a headache, she knew Duque very well. She knew that Duque would not start a war over a small matter that could lead to civil strife. What else do you know? Duque waved his hand lightly, and Onyxia immediately walked over. I found Tesario. What? You mean Tesario? He hasn't appeared for 10,000 years. The Red Dragon Queen was shocked. But I sensed him in the Obsidian Temple of the Dragon Slumber Temple. Not just him, there's no less than a large group of adult black dragons. The Black Dragon Princess seemed very certain. This time, Alexstrasza could not remain calm. Because the Obsidian Temple was right below the Dragon Slumber Temple. In fact, the Black Dragon Princess had never been to the Obsidian Temple. The temple that should have belonged to the Black Dragon army had been sealed before she was born. Since Duque wanted her to say it, this cunning female black dragon did not need to prepare a draft when she lied. After all, this was a secret that her master, who was like the god of fate, knew. Among the countless secrets of the Dragon Slumber Temple, the temples of the various dragons had always been a secret existence that the dragon aspects avoided talking about. But not long ago, the Obsidian Temple had changed. It seemed that adult black dragons had returned here and began to incubate dragon eggs and raise new young dragons. It was the Twilight dragons that were considered taboo by the Dragon Slumber Temple. The one leading these black dragons was the powerful black dragon Cytherio, who had disappeared in the ancient war. Chapter 1554. The Dragon Sleep Temple knew nothing about this, but unfortunately, they couldn't hide it from a transmigrator like Duque. The queen's figure was trembling. This is no small matter. The Black Dragon Princess said with certainty, "Why don't you take your men and come with me?" The queen was also very decisive. "Give me a day, I want to gather the Red Dragon army. Tomorrow at noon, I'll wait for you at the Dragon Sleep Temple." Okay. After agreeing with Onyxia, the queen looked at Duque again. The Dragon Sleep Temple owes you another favor. If Malygos really does something reckless without asking for a reason, the Dragon Sleep Temple will stand on the side of justice. The queen said this, which meant that if it really came to that, the dragons could only give up on Maligos. After all, they knew their brother's trap best. In these 10,000 years, hadn't the queen lamented Maligos countless times? In the past, Azeroth wasn't dangerous. If Maligos wanted to be crazy or autistic, it was up to him. Now, he kept making mistakes. If it wasn't for him helping to guard the Void battlefield a while ago, Alexstrasza almost wanted to start a vote in the Dragonsleep Temple to remove him from his position as the Blue Dragon King. Just now, Duque had been tough because he wanted her to see the big picture. Any existence that stood in the way of protecting Azeroth would be crushed to pieces. It wasn't that she hadn't heard the argument that Maligos should ban mortals from using magic and bring it under his jurisdiction. In fact, if she really did that, where would Duque, the demigod of the Weave, stand? The alliance led by Duque was already the core force against the Burning Legion and the fallen ancient gods. If the Dragonsleep Temple still protected Maligos at this time, then it would be violating the duty that the Titans had left them. In the face of the big picture, Alexstrasza had to make a promise. Duque was very satisfied. Letting the Dragonsleep Temple clean up first was actually clearing the mines in advance. This was like cutting off the enemy's claws and teeth in advance. This method of weakening the opponent step by step and then dealing a fatal blow just so happened to be what Onyxia valued and liked the most. Ending the magic communication, Duque felt Onyxia's scorching gaze. He turned slightly and met Onyxia's eyes. Interestingly, Duque felt that her gaze had become similar to Vashti's. It was a pleasant surprise that the Black Dragon girl, who used to be a little reluctant, would change like this. Ignoring her, Duque turned to Theon. Tonight's mission has been accomplished. Cancel the red alert and lower the alert level to yellow. Theon nodded. Understood. There was no need for Duque to make arrangements for small matters like defense. Although Gavin Rad suggested speeding up the construction of the Fearless Stronghold, Duque shook his head and refused. In the world of ice and snow, the Lich King's family wasn't the only one looking for trouble. After the internal troubles of the Dragon Slumber Shrine were eliminated, there were only 2 enemies left. To be precise, it was 1.5 at this time. Another magical message came. It was from Queen Sylvanas. Duque, a few half-crippled bone dragons escaped here. Tyrande and I have decided to train the Aerial Knight's pursuit ability. We won't go back tonight. Duke nodded. All right, thank you for your hard work. Fighting against an overlord of the sky like ice dragons was a rare experience. And in a situation where they had the upper hand, training the troops like this would reduce their losses. It was impossible for Arthas to not have any ice dragons left. Training the troops now would greatly reduce losses when the time came. With a wave of his hand, Duque opened a portal and brought Onyxia back to the Lordaeron Palace. Seeing the familiar light of the portal, the guards guarding the fixed portal still gripped their weapons dutifully. Seeing that it was Duque, they heaved a sigh of relief and saluted. Duque arrived at Kalia's palace unimpeded. As soon as the door opened, Kalia, who was wearing a nightgown, pounced on him and gave Duque a pecking kiss. Thank you, Duque, Kalia said excitedly. Beside her was Gianna, who was smiling. Seeing the Black Dragon Princess beside her, Kalia let go of Duque and grabbed her hand. Thank you too, Onyxia. The Black Dragon Princess was clearly not used to such intimate contact. She looked like she wanted to pull her hand back, but did not dare to. After a while, she could only bite the bullet and say, "This is Master's order." Her face was full of an "I didn't do it willingly" expression. But it is still a fact that you helped defend Lordaeron. Kalia held the Black Dragon's hand and leaned her head closer. The Black Dragon was not used to the burning light in her eyes. Most dragons were aloof. After Onyxia was born by her mother, she did not have any family warmth to speak of. Sinestra had been merciful enough not to kill the 2 siblings back then. After growing up, even her eldest brother, Nefarian, was in a relationship of mutual benefit. When had she ever experienced such intimate gratitude? It wasn't until this moment that Onyxia realized that she had social phobia in her bones. Not to mention the nobles of Stormwind that she played with back then. They were just pawns. When she really put the other party in the same position as her, she was suddenly at a loss. Just as she was about to retreat, Duke had already blocked her path of retreat without her noticing. Duke smirked. He suddenly realized that the clumsy black dragon princess actually had a cute side. It's very simple, Xianxia. Just say, no need to thank me, this is what I should do. That's very likable. What's the point of being stubborn now? What was originally cute will become not cute at all. Cute. Xianxia felt as if a certain soft part of her heart had been struck by lightning. Her whole body trembled, but she could not tell why. Cute? Can someone like me be cute? She muttered to herself in a daze. Even before she came out of her shell, she felt that she had always been associated with words like terror, ferociousness, destruction, and destruction. Even her own mother would only look at her with a mixture of fear and horror. As she grew up, she began to enslave many monsters, dragon men, and a bunch of random creatures. Every existence looked at her with the same gaze. She used to feel uncomfortable, but after she got used to it, she told herself that she should be happy. Gradually, her heart became twisted. Unexpectedly, after being treated as spineless and depraved submission, after being a mount for so long, she discovered another kind of feeling. Strangely, she found that her heart instinctively desired this kind of feeling. Cute me? Yes, you are very cute now. Duke was amused. He suddenly realized that when he poked the black dragon princess' waist with his finger, she actually made a sound similar to a cat's meow. It was so charming. Chapter 1555. After a night of dragon taming, Duke was starting to doubt his life. Xianxia's taming last night made him think that he was dealing with Kalia, and not the once cunning and sinister evil female black dragon. But this was good, as it saved him the trouble of keeping a close eye on her. Having two female Eridar demons under him was enough of a headache. Playing this kind of game of mutual deception would be tiring. Of course, he had to be rewarded. When Xianxia woke up, Duke told her a secret. Have you heard of Archefon's treasury? Of course, Xianxia had never heard of this thing before, but that didn't stop her from hearing the most important word, treasure vault. Treasures were the love of greedy she-dragons. What? Tell me. Countess Katrana, who used to exude a seductive aura, was now a greasy little fairy. The treasury is at Wintergrass Lake. There is indeed a lot of good equipment there, but you won't want them. But she asked even though she knew that Duke was trying to bait her. Because the key to the treasury lies in the few guardians. Wintergrass Lake, where the treasury was located, was the largest lake in Northrend. With its unique strategic location and rich elemental materials, it naturally became a place that the Alliance and the Horde fought over. Now that the Horde's army had not set off, and young Salyafar was still gathering his subordinates in the barren lands, Archefon's treasury naturally had nothing to do with the Horde. The location of the treasury was rather sensitive. From the map of Azeroth, the shape of Northrend in the north was a bit like a big kidney. The west and east sides were closer to the central maelstrom, while the Dragonbone Waste in the middle of the Wyrmrest Temple was sunken into the north. Although there were traces of the Scourge army throughout Northrend, strictly speaking, the southern region was not under their control. The Scourge army's absolute control was actually the Icecrown Glacier in the northwest of Northwind. On the map, Wintergrass Lake was located at the midpoint between the Alliance's new Fearless Fortress in the Northwind Tundra region and Arthas Icecrown Fortress. It was only a mountain away from the Second Fool's Nest. It could be said that the treasury was quite close to the Gate of Heaven's Wrath, which could reach Arthas' lair, the Icecrown Fortress. However, it was not within the Doomsday Army's absolute control. As an ancient Titan building, the treasures inside could not be underestimated. The Guardians were the Rock Guardian Archivon, the Storm Guardian Emeron, the Flame Guardian Kolalon, and the Ice Guardian Turawan. The four demigod guardians were typical elemental giants. Duke didn't know if they had divinity in them. Even if they didn't, the incomparably pure power of the four elements in them was a great supplement for Duke and Xianxia. After becoming a demigod of the weave continuously absorbed the spiritual force of its user. It also used the excess spiritual force to connect to the four major elemental realms, extracting the wandering elements and filtering them before sending them to the spellcaster for use. In the process, Duque had refined many high-purity elements. However, the higher the purity, the harder it was to refine, and a battle between gods required extremely high-purity elements to hurt the other party. In the battle with Jaden, Duque had experienced this deeply. If he had been the main attacker in the battle at the Well of the Sun, who knew how long it would take to grind the eggs to death? After explaining the characteristics of the treasury to Xianxia, Duque concluded, Archivon's treasury is both an opportunity and a trap for Arthas. I understand. It's a good opportunity. It was easy to talk to a clever dragon. If they waited until the fearless fortress was built before going to Archivon's treasury, it would become a push, and Arthas would definitely not consider attacking casually. On the other hand, if Duque went to the treasury now, whether Arthas came out or not, the alliance would benefit. If he came out, Duque, who now had the air advantage, would definitely not mind letting Elun throw a bunch of meteorites at him to teach the fool a lesson. If he didn't come out, because Duque was wandering in front, the Scourge would definitely not dare to pass by Duque and attack the fearless fortress directly. This would also buy time for the fearless fortress to be built. This was where Duque's strategy was ruthless. First knock out the Scourge's strongest air force, then step by step cut off the Scourge's space of activity and cut off their wings. This kind of strategy could be said to be steady and imposing, and it was used by the Alliance, so it was not easy to make mistakes. In the morning, after washing up, Duque took the Black Dragon Princess and Jaina and opened the portal to Naxxramas. In the command post of this flying fortress, Duque held a video conference with the Alliance leaders. Magni Bronzebeard was the first to ask, "What? You said you want to attack Archivon's treasury? I have no problem with this, but Duque, do you mean we are going to attack Njasa, the gate of heaven's wrath?" Duque raised his hand, and a general 3D map of the Ice Crown Glacier appeared in front of the kings. It had to be said that Nazul and Arthas had chosen a good place for their nest. The terrain of the Ice Crown Glacier was very high, located in the northwest of Northrend, with an average altitude of more than 1,000 meters. The whole area looked like a omega on the map, or it could be said to be shaped like a horseshoe. Duque explained, there are only two ways to reach the Ice Crown Fortress where the Lich King Arthas is located. One is to attack the Gate of Heaven's Wrath in the southwest side of the mountain, and after that, the Ice Crown Fortress is right above the gate. The second is to obediently follow the Lich King's line of defense from the southeast all the way to the north side of the canyon, braving the firepower from the top of the canyon, then circle back from the north to the Court of Bones, in the southwest, and finally kill their way to the Ice Crown Fortress. This choice would make any commander with a little common sense frown. This kind of detour was simply sending food to the Scourge army. Not to mention the firepower from the top of the canyon, just the people who died in the canyon and were resurrected on the spot were enough to make the attackers suffer. More and more enemies would appear every minute. Can't we attack from the air? Kudrin frowned deeply. My men are already used to flying in cold weather. Give us some time. Duque shook his head. Impossible. Duque casually waved his finger, and on the 3D map, the plateau basin where the Ice Crown Glacier was located was suddenly enveloped by a mournful howl of a blizzard. Duque sternly said, "This time, Arthas clearly has the geographical advantage. I have tried many times, but I can't extend the magic net to the Ice Crown Glacier and the storm cliffs in the east. That is Arthas' absolute home ground, and he can summon a large number of frost elementals in that area at will, destroying all the aerial knights and flying fleets that approach." Chapter 1556. This was going to be hard to deal with. At that moment, all the leaders of the Alliance frowned. Not being able to use their air force was tantamount to wiping out the Alliance's current technological advantage. If they were to return to the most primitive land warfare, how many lives would they have to sacrifice to break through the Ice Crown Fortress? It would be fine if they could calculate the total number of lives lost, but they were afraid that the Scourge army would become stronger and stronger, and the number of undyings would increase. This was not a joke. The whole of Northrend was already full of undyings. Zudak, in the northeast corner of Northrend, was the territory of the ice trolls after the explosion of the Well of Eternity. Now it had become a paradise for the undead. In the southeast corner was the settlement of the savage, violent, and vicious Vrykul people. This group of half-giant bloodline warmongers mistakenly regarded the Lich King as the Lord of Justice, who could lead them to conquer Northrend and even the whole world. The warriors of the various factions who had come on the expedition had become a huge obstacle to their ambitions. The extreme warmongers had completely reduced them to the lackeys of the Scourge army. Under the call of King Immerlin, groups of savage Vrykul warriors became undead and turned into the Scourge army as the greatest glory. They used their endless destruction and slaughter to prove their strength in exchange for dying in battle to become the Scourge army. Apart from Duque, no one knew how strong the Lich King Arthas was now. If the elites of the Alliance and the Horde were to be sacrificed, they would be able to create another batch of bone griffins or undead hippogriffs. Then, together with the power of the Scourge army, they would be able to raise the Dragonbone Temple to the ground, turning all the dragon remains in the Dragonbone Waste into undead dragons. Then, Azeroth would be finished. William said, "Uncle Duque, do you have any good suggestions?" This attack on the Alcaphon treasury is just a simple trap. It doesn't matter if Arthas takes our bait or not. In the big battle, we have to fight steadily. Duque raised his hand, and the chess piece representing the Alliance's army began to move on the 3D map. On the western front, once the Fearless Fortress is built, we will immediately advance all the way north and occupy the entire Northwind Taiga, Sriracha Basin, and Winter Embrace Lake. I hope that the Western Army can use Winter Embrace Lake as a base and cooperate with Naxxramas to confront the Ice-Crown Fortress. We have to create the impression that Naxxramas will hit the Ice-Crown Fortress at any time. Hofeirel let out a small cry. She was shocked by Duque's idea. Naxxramas with Arthas. After all, Naxxramas was a creation of the Titans. No matter how terrible Arthas' cold wind was, it could not blow Naxxramas down with its anti-gravity engine. Losing Naxxramas was akin to the Scourge shooting themselves in the foot. The Alliance with. After everyone paused for a moment, Duke continued, "The arrangements for the Western Front are almost done. Magni, I'll give you 50,000 human infantry. I'll leave the Western Front to you." The Dwarf King laughed heartily. The Western Front was made up of dwarves and gnomes. The Western Front had always been dominated by the dwarves and gnomes, so it was easy for him to go there. Now we have to deal with the Eastern Front. With a wave of Duque's hand, a fleet model appeared in the east. I need a large-scale landing battle from both the east and west sides of the Howling Fjord. Try to occupy the Vrykul's Utgard Castle within a week. Then head north, flatten the Grizzly Hills and Zudak, and finally reach the Crystal Song Forest in the middle. Leave it to me. Varian stood up and volunteered. Duque smiled. Even if you didn't ask, I would have done it. But this time, I'll have to trouble you to bring young Seraphar's orc troops. They'll be a good hand in the siege. Do I have air cover here? Since most of the flying fleet is useless in the Ice Crown Glacier, they'll be transferred to the Eastern Front when we reach the Winter Embrace Lake. Also, Duque glanced at Prince Kael. The prince understood and smiled. When His Majesty Rin attacks Utgard Castle, the Dalajan will arrive. Attention! It's the Dalajan, not the Dalajan Wizard Legion. This meant that the Dalajan was really going to use all of its power. This time, all the leaders gasped. Using the entire country to suppress them. The power was great, but on the other hand, if they failed, it would be equivalent to the destruction of the country. All the wizards and their apprentices would become liches and necromancers. That was really daring. But after thinking about it, they felt relieved. The true ruler of the Dalajan was Duque, the demigod of the Weave. Without his instructions, how could Kael, that suppressed the Dalajan academies and make such a bold move? Among the countries, other than the Dalajan, who had the ability to move their capital, there was also the Dreniai's Exodar. Although it could be assumed that the Alliance was taking care of the severely injured Dreniai, Duke did not even ask Imriel about it, which made Imriel feel like he was the only one who was alienated. Hoof bit her lip and said to herself, "Imriel, oh Imriel, you must do something, or else you and your people will continue to be secretly ostracized." In fact, she was thinking too much. Firstly, the Draenei were small in number and weak. Secondly, Duque was afraid that if the Draenei were to enter the battlefield, it would further damage the Draenei's vitality. Duque had informed the other leaders to try not to let the Draenei be the infantry in the charge, but in the end, it made Hoof think too much. Duque did not notice this detail and continued to arrange the army. As the fearless fortress was quickly built, Vashch's Naga and Murloc army were naturally transferred to the Eastern Front. When she saw that even the Naga and Karaji insect people had missions, Hoof finally could not help but ask, "Commander Marcus, may I ask what the Draenei's mission is?" Marid, who was standing beside her, took a step forward so that his body was closer to the front of the 3D projection. His intention to fight was obvious. Duque was speechless, but then he smiled. "All right then, I originally considered that the Draenei's vitality was greatly injured." Imriel suddenly stood up and puffed out her chest. "Commander, please do not worry. The Draenei's responsibility is to exorcise evil. We have long been used to sacrifice." Imriel's words were sonorous and powerful, and many of the Alliance leaders were moved. "All right then, promise me a few conditions. Please speak. I can put the Draenei's holy knights together with the Silver Hand, and they will be responsible for the final assault on the Ice Crown Fortress. But in the assault team, only children without descendants are not allowed to enter, no siblings are allowed to enter, and only one family is allowed to enter." Chapter 1557. Everyone fell silent when they heard this. Who didn't have friends and family in this world? Everyone knew that Duque was doing this for the good of the Draenei. Unknowingly, Imriel's eyes became a little moist. Fair and just, yet humane. Perhaps it was because the Alliance had such a leader that it was so strong. Imriel felt that she had wronged Duque. "Thank you for your understanding, Lord Commander. The Draenei will take note of this, but we hope to participate in more aspects and truly integrate into the big family of the Alliance." Hoof's words were very appropriate. It was hard to imagine that she was still a young girl half a year ago. Most of the leaders smiled. They were never stingy with encouraging juniors with potential, just like how Magni nurtured William back then. Moreover, with Duque's backing, they could do whatever they wanted. As for Hoof's request, Duque basically satisfied it. After all, the Holy Knight was the symbol of the Alliance and had an irreplaceable role. Their existence itself was a symbol of the fight against evil. Compared to mages who needed talent, Holy Knights could basically become a Holy Knight as long as they were devout. At this critical juncture against the Scourge army, the more devout Draenei could obviously play a greater role. After the meeting, fierce battles broke out all over Northrend. First was the Obsidian Temple. Under Onyxia's lead, the Red Dragon army swarmed in. Sure enough, they found Ceterio with a group of adult black dragons hatching twilight dragons. To put it bluntly, Ceterio couldn't even defeat Onyxia. His fate was decided from the moment the Obsidian Temple was attacked. When the angry Alexstrasza bit off Ceterio's neck, Onyxia had almost killed the rest of the black dragons. The Red Dragon army entered the battlefield more to wipe out the Draconians and black dragons, as well as to prevent any of them from escaping. What a loss of composure! Not a single one of the chromatic dragons in the Dragon Slumber Temple discovered that Ceterio was breeding such a blasphemous creature right under his nose. The Red Dragon Queen crushed the last Twilight Dragon egg with her claw. Onyxia held her neck high, her black vertical pupils filled with pride. "My master is indeed the master of fate. Your Majesty Alexstrasza, I know. I will help Duque suppress the Heaven's Wrath Gate." The queen turned her head. "Cleostras." Krasus lowered his head. "Yes, Your Majesty. I'm here. Pass down my order. Have all the mobility troops of the Sleeping Dragon Temple patrol the Dragonbone Waste. If they find any traces of the Scourge army, report immediately." The Red Dragon Queen gritted her teeth. "Don't even think about desecrating the remains of our people." The activity of the Dragon Slumber Shrine also stimulated Arthes in the Ice Crown Fortress. Sitting upright on the ice throne, Arthes's entire body was enveloped by an icy wind that was close to absolute zero. Just getting close to the ice throne gave her the terrifying feeling that her body had been completely frozen. Are those giant lizards impatient to come here to die? Below the throne, an undead woman with huge demonic wings knelt on one knee. From her appearance, one could tell that she used to be a beautiful high elf. She was the Blood Queen Lanais. History changed again. In history, she was the confidant of the elf prince Kael. When Kael sided with Illidan, she followed Illidan to Northrend to crusade against Arthas. However, she, who was bent on revenge against the Scourge army, unfortunately died in battle. The dead Lanais and the other blood elf elites were resurrected by the Lich King and became the Sarine family. They assisted the Lich King in commanding the Scourge army to fight everywhere. In this life, because of Duke's incessant troubles, even Kael did not side with Illidan. However, she unfortunately died while resisting Arthas' invasion of Kuel Salis and was turned into an undead. With the grass growing 3 feet high on Thuzad's grave, Arthas, who had no one to use, had no choice but to promote her as his assistant. Lanais said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, those lizards did not leave the Dragonbone Waste area, but they cleaned up a few of our Lich teams." Arthas waved her hand. "Ignore them. I just want to know what Duke Marcus is doing." Duke Marcus himself led a team led by a demigod into Wintergrasp Lake Fortress. "What? Why didn't you report to me earlier?" A gust of cold wind blew, and half of the Blood Queen's body was instantly frozen in the extremely hard ice, leaving only her head outside. Lanais replied with difficulty, "Your Majesty, that place has never been our sphere of influence. Now our gargoyles and deaths, I can't leave the Ice Crown Glacier area." "Humph." Arthas waved her hand, and the ice around Lanais's body instantly shattered. The Blood Queen knew that she had finally escaped the fate of destruction. Arthas's face darkened. He had shot himself in the foot this time. In order to resist Duke's Weave invasion, he had used a large number of frost elementals to surround his lair. The extremely cold ice storm isolated the enemy spying, but it also caused his perception of the elements to drop to a low point. He was a paladin in life and a death knight after death. Whether it was in life or after death, he was actually only good at frost elementals, and his perception of other elements was rather poor. This caused him to be unable to sense Duke when he suppressed his elemental fluctuations, even if he swaggered past the foot of the mountain 10 kilometers away. Moreover, Winter Embrace Lake was originally a Titan ruin. There were their own elemental guards there, and the Lich King's undead could not enter the area at all. In the end, Duke had gotten the upper hand just like that. Just as Duke had expected, Duke's move had made him rather uncomfortable. Even the gargoyle that had spied on Duke's group entering Winter Embrace Lake's stronghold had been deliberately let off by Duke. In the image, Duke had entered with Vashj and Onyxia, as well as Servanas, Jaina, and several other alliance powerhouses. In the end, he did not forget to smile at the gargoyle. This was clearly saying, "I'm right here, come out and hit me if you can." Arthas's entire body was trembling. Such provocation! Such arrogance! Did they really think that he, the Lich King, was a fake? "Pass down my order. Attack from the gates of heaven's wrath." "Your Majesty, could it be a trap?" Lanais reminded softly. "Trap? Of course it's a trap. But he underestimated my strength. He thought that I was still the same me that he had wantonly cut off my arm and cut into 2 at the waist." Arthas clenched his fists. "Underestimating my strength is his greatest failure. And the price is the eternal calamity of his soul. Since he destroyed Thuzad, he will use his own soul to replace Thuzad. He is a demigod," Lanais said with a trembling voice. "There is no existence that can escape my enslavement after dying under my sword." Arthas slowly raised his world-famous Frostmourne. The ferocious skeleton blade emitted the most vicious and vivid evil light. Chapter 1558. Any strong person's confidence and pride were 2 sides of the same coin. He felt that he had become a lot stronger, but it was difficult to quantify how much stronger he was. Even if it could be quantified, the opponent's experience, skill usage and rhythm, elemental control, and the surrounding environment would all affect the final outcome of the battle. Since Arthas called himself the Lich King, he at least had the spirit of a king. The unyielding king. No true king would readily admit that their skills were inferior to others. It was just like how he did not hesitate to send Sindagosa even though he knew that Lord Darren was a trap. After all, the Scourge army could easily grow in numbers. Apart from alchemists and management talents who could develop new monsters, everything else was expendable. Even though he had lost to Duque twice, Arthas was still fearless. He was already the Lich King, the enemy of all living beings in the world. If he still had any reservations, he wouldn't need to maintain the Scourge army. Just as Arthas was about to make her move, Duke and his entourage, who were theoretically supposed to have entered Archefon's treasury, were currently in an ice house right next to the entrance of the treasury. The ice house was modeled after the Eskimos and was hemispherical in shape. However, it looked even cooler when built. Duque used Magician's hand to pull up a large pile of ice from the ground, and used magic to cut them into square ice blocks of 40 centimeters in length, width, and height. He then piled them up. A random icicle spell would blow up a large amount of snow, and anyone who saw it would see a pile of snow. This thing was very common in the world of ice and snow in Nocent. After entering the small door that was about half the height of a person, they entered a small world that was about 10 square meters. A magic formation that was lightly infused with frost elements isolated the air inside and outside. There was a small table beside a small heater. At this moment, they were playing landlord. King Bomb. Jaina smiled like a flower. No way. No wonder we can't even see the cards. Duque exclaimed. I'm not playing anymore. Let's switch to Oni or Celia. Queen Sylvia threw down her cards, seemingly distracted. Onyxia clearly had the question, when are you entering the treasury? Written all over her face, but her mouth said, I'm just a mount. Vashj also said, as a maid, being able to serve master and mistress is already a great blessing. Duque laughed heartily. Don't be so nervous. Regardless of whether he succeeded in luring the enemy or not, this would not be the place for the final battle. Only the summit of Ice Crown Fortress would decide the outcome of the battle. This is the choice of fate. Queen Sylvanas sighed when she saw Onyxia's eyes lit up. How could this once treacherous black dragon be so easily fooled? Jaina, on the other hand, was at ease. She even pestered Duque to ask if he had any fun games. She shook Duque's shoulders so intimately that Duque almost lost his mind and took out the mahjong. However, after thinking about it, Duque decided to give up. Mahjong was poisonous. Once he took it out, wouldn't it be suicidal if a group of queens ignored him and focused on playing mahjong? Duque said seriously, I still want to observe the situation at the Gate of Heaven's Wrath. The small magic mirror erected in the air was indeed showing the real-time situation of the Gate of Heaven's Wrath. Unfortunately, this so-called surveillance was boring. The huge black gate, which was nearly 50 meters tall, stood quietly at the foot of the mountain, letting the wind and snow blow on it day and night. Rather than saying it was a gate, it was more like a simple decoration. The black iron skull on the gate did not look that fierce under the cover of the snow. It just gave people the feeling that it was just SOSO. So boring. Queen Sylvanas complained. Why don't I make you pregnant like how I made your sister pregnant? Queen Sylvie rolled her eyes at Duke before he could finish his sentence. I am me, my sisters are my sisters. Before I took care of Arthas, I was the Queen of Sin Dorii. Queen Sylvanas' meaning was clear. She would not think about having children until she got her revenge. Duque shrugged. He was just saying it out of boredom. A bunch of little kids running around in the Mage Tower, squealing. The Holy Land of Arcana had become a kindergarten. That kind of scene. Sorry, he did not dare to imagine it. At this moment, the huge gate of the Gate of Heaven's Wrath suddenly trembled. Brrr. From small to large, the huge tremors caused the scenery that seemed to have remained unchanged for thousands of years to change. The ice on the door cracked and fell, exploding all over the ground. When the pitch-black gate opened, it was like an ancient beast opening its mouth. The wind and snow near the gate suddenly became stronger, and the image that was observed with the magician's eye and binoculars suddenly became blurry. In that kind of snowstorm where one couldn't even see their fingers in front of them, any attempt to observe the door with the naked eye seemed weak. Arthis, that brat, is getting more and more daring. Duke teased. Not only was Duque older than Arthas, he had started his career earlier. It was not too much to call him kid, but the Lich King would definitely be unhappy if he heard it. Jaina's expression darkened and she warned, Duke, be careful. I feel a huge shift in the elemental network. Arthas has moved the exit of the entire frost elemental realm. If I can't even sense this, I'd be a demigod of the weave in vain. Duque's mouth twitched. Should we stop him? Or wait until he reaches Winter Embrace Lake? Queen Sylvanas asked. Stop him? Aren't we in Archivon's treasury now? If we suddenly run out, even a fool would shrink back. Duque smiled mysteriously. It had to be said that Arthas's entrance was very impressive. He waved Frostmourne, and all the frost elements in the world trembled. The ice elementals drifting around No Scent were like fanatical fans, crazily rushing towards Winter Lake. They gathered under Arthas's feet, forming a huge ice bridge under his unparalleled evil will. It extended from the west side of Heaven's Wrath all the way to the east side of Winter Embrace Lake. Although he couldn't see it on the screen, Duque could sense from the agitation of the frost elements that Arthas was sitting on a huge piece of floating ice. It was as if he was riding an escalator, sliding over. Just as Arthis and her men were about to descend on the floating ice the size of a football field, Duke's voice echoed in the air above Winter Embrace Lake's fortress. Come down. His voice was clear, but it was as loud as thunder. The Calamity Army powerhouses were shocked. They raised their heads, but there was only a vast expanse of whiteness above them. Apart from the surging cold air and fluttering snowflakes, there was nothing else. What the hell was Duke Marcus doing? Chapter 1559. The heavy and huge helmet had a steel-green hue that seemed to isolate all life from it. On top of the crown of death, there was a small skull ornament in the middle that flickered with a demonic light. All of Arthi's expression was hidden behind the T-shaped opening of the helmet. Only the glint of her eyes could be seen, glowing blue in the wind and snow. Her long silver-white hair flowed out from the gap between the helmet and pauldrons, fluttering in the wind. The raging frost elements were vibrating, and the Lich King had already activated his full firepower. No one doubted that as soon as Duque showed his head, he would be attacked by Arthis. Duke Marcus, this is Northrend. A sonorous voice full of resentment spread far and wide amidst the snowstorm. A disdainful voice came from the void. Arthis, this is Azeroth. In an instant, it was clear who was superior. Perhaps Arthis was the king of the dead in Northrend. But I, Duke Marcus, am the demigod of Azeroth. Was Northrend bigger or Azeroth bigger? It was just a single sentence, but it was a resounding slap to the face. At this moment, Jaina, who was beside Duque, laughed so hard that she couldn't straighten her back. She whispered, Duque, I like your magnanimity. Arthis was taken aback. If not for the heavy helmet of the Lich King covering his face, his subordinates would be able to see his face right now. Even if it wasn't an enraged expression, it would still be frighteningly gloomy. Duke Marcus, do you only know how to use words? Arthis raised his head slightly. There was no response from the sky. Only Arthis' slightly provocative voice echoed above the mountain walls and Winter Lake's stronghold, like a gust of wind that no one would care about. Very well. Since Arthis is here. In the ice house, Duque clapped his hands happily. With me as the standard, southwest 11 degrees 22 minutes, distance 1,494 meters. Let's start with a wave of attacks. Of course, Duque didn't say that to the girls in the ice house. In another magic mirror, there was the grinning face of Bu Lang Bronzebeard. Arthis suddenly heard an incomparably dense roar. Although it was very far away, she could still faintly hear the sound in the wind. She looked towards the south, and in the blink of an eye, her vision reflected a swarm of black dots that looked like locusts. Those were countless artillery shells. Boring. Arthis didn't even raise his right hand. He merely raised his left hand, which was covered in a heavy black iron glove, high up in the air, and an ice storm swept up in the sky. Countless icicles appeared out of thin air, forming a huge rotating curtain. Every artillery shell that entered within a kilometer of this ice tornado would be directly pulled into the center of the tornado. He thought that this was the end, but who knew that the shells that were supposed to explode with the firing pin and gunpowder would suddenly explode with a loud boom. Countless amounts of golden holy water splashed out along with the explosions of the cannonballs, as if golden fireworks were blooming in the sky. It was very beautiful, and it also stimulated His Majesty the Lich King's nerves. Arthas could clearly feel that because of the holy power within the artillery shells colliding with the evil power he had poured into the ice storm, his control over the ice storm was rapidly weakening. With a cold snort, more illusory thin white lines appeared on Arthas' left finger. This control over the ice element. Jaina, who was watching the battle through the magic mirror, was stunned. She was also a frost elementalist, and even though they were on different sides, she couldn't help but subconsciously praise Arthas. In a sense, Arthas's control over the ice element was also a goal for her to learn. "Don't think that this is all to my welcoming ceremony." Duque snapped his fingers. Winter's Embrace Lake was Nascent's largest freshwater lake, but it was rarely visited. The biggest reason was that Winter's Embrace Lake was surrounded by mountains. The towering and precipitous mountains were the world's best city walls, protecting Winter's Embrace Lake. 2 kilometers away from Arthas, the flying battleship Hood was rapidly ascending. Above the mermaid portrait that was added later, Tyrande Whisperwind gracefully stood on the mermaid's shoulder. Her gaze crossed the 2 kilometers and locked onto Arthas's group. 2 kilometers was not even a black dot if she were to look at a person. If she were to look at an ice bridge that was created out of thin air, it would be a different story. "So cool. Arthas." Tyrande's adopted daughter, Chandrise, teased. Tyrande rolled her eyes at Chandrise, then raised her hands high. Her jade-white arms had a faint bluish-purple color to them, and holy power circulated rapidly in her body, causing the atmosphere to vibrate along with the activation of the divine spell. Immediately after, a thick purple line descended from the clouds, piercing through the sky covered by the snowstorm. The meteor that descended from the atmosphere easily broke through the thick layer of snow and ice, ignoring Arthas's ice element. It crashed straight down, smashing straight towards where Arthas was. The Doomsday Army's powerhouses instantly froze. Most of the surrounding Alliance soldiers raised their heads to look at the trail of the bluish-purple comet descending from the sky. After Elune used this technique multiple times without sparing any of her divine power, the Alliance soldiers were no longer unfamiliar with it. However, due to the large-scale elimination of the cursing sect members, the Doomsday Army's ability to obtain information from the outside world had become even more sluggish. This was the first time most of the Doomsday Army's powerhouses had seen such a technique. Arthas recognized it, and a cold voice came from within the black helmet. Actually, up until this moment, Arthas could still choose to dodge. He was not willing to even take a step back, because he was the Lich King Arthas. He was standing in his own territory. He was standing at the starting point of conquering the entire world. Starfall clearly had at least 10 more seconds to reach his head, but he was just standing there. No dodging. No dodging. Arthas raised, Frostmourne, high up, and the eye sockets of the skull on the blade emitted the darkest evil light. Under Arthas's feet, ice blue runes spread out one after another, and every rune was shining. The chill of death spread endlessly with Arthas as the center, as if the place where he was standing right now was the ice throne hanging alone on the snowy peaks. All the Doomsday Army's leaders subconsciously retreated, because what was about to erupt was a terrifying ultimate technique that could even freeze the souls of the undead. In the distance, Duque sighed, "Arthas, you're really not bad." Duque was all too familiar with the power of Starfall. Not long ago, the same terrifying attack directly turned Jaden into ashes. However, Arthas actually faintly showed the momentum of withstanding this attack. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.